traditional Eastern European nations making it onto the podium as well. It's the New World Order, guys, and you're at the front of it, you're spearheading it. Listen, good luck in the rest of your final.
Welcome to the Mike and Doug Show. This is Doug. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Doug. How are you today?
Well, you're just driving me crazy because, you know, your discovery that you've been working on now for a couple of weeks is maybe the biggest thing we've ever found. And that is saying a lot because we have discovered together and through research of all these researchers, we've brought up to light some things that the British government does not want to be brought to light. And what you have now done is amazing. I'm going to prepare a backdrop for this, if you don't mind. Take a couple minutes. Because this story is huge. And what you're gonna find us doing today is kind of stumbling through this because the research is still pouring in, and the further you look, the more you see, and the scarier it is, and the more pervasive it is. So what happened was the following. The coronavirus came up as a topic, and somehow people asked the researchers to tell us about it. So bingo, we found a very specific company in Britain that actually owns that patent and owns a vaccine for that, a patent for that coronavirus. And it's in England, of course. And so that started some research that then went to a topic that I had previously looked at it, and I only got a little ways with the subject of a company called Kinetic, and take the K out and the C out at the beginning and end and put Q's there. So no one could have pronounced this word when you actually look at it on the page, which kind of helps obfuscate what it is because you can't even say it. But the name of it is Kinetic. Now, Kinetic, Q at the end, Q at the last, well, we like to say it's the queen from beginning to end, from Q to Q. It's also Q, who was in James Bond, the guy who invented everything, or the Q Continuum, which was in, of course, Star Trek, which was the ultimate intelligence, or the Q clearance on 4chan and 8chan. And so you get to see that people love to use Q as a I don't even know, a definer of their high intelligence. Well,
to me would be anathema. My name is Robert De Niro.
I've been thinking about what makes you different, and the fact that you dress differently and you talk differently and the cigar's different and the act was different and you've had so many different jobs. I think that sums up your life, isn't it? You try and be different.
I never actually tried to be anything. I started off down the pit, and I used to go up at 4:30 in the morning and walk 1.5 miles to catch a bus. And then I'd get to the pit and I'd walk another 1.5 miles, bent double, banging my head on the girders and things like that. So all I ever wanted was to stop in bed. Now, how can you stop in bed? You can't stop in bed if you're a plumber. You can't stop in bed if you're a builder or anything like that. And so the only thing that I found you could stop in bed was to run a disco or a dance hall or something like that, because at least you could stop in bed till 12 o'clock. Right, and that by starts that tilted me down to the ground, and then I turned it into a bit of fun, and I thought, stopping in bed is terrific. What else is there? And I thought, I know, a bit of fun. So I had a bit of fun at nobody's expense. Never did any harm to anybody in my life, but stopping in bed. Because when you come to think, it was since I've been working in hospitals as a volunteer, the number of people that get brought in between daybreak and about 12 o'clock lunchtime on trolleys is amazing. And they've all done themselves in somehow. So if I stop in bed, I've missed all that. Missed it all. It's all gone.
So if you learn nothing else from this interview, the longer you sleep and the more you stay in bed, the less chance of anything happening or going wrong.
Les agissements de celui qui fut anobli par la reine, reçu par le pape, dépassaient le...
If you can get away with it. A lot of people can't get away with it. A lot of people like to do that, but they can't get away with it. I was lucky insofar as I got away with it, and people were sorry for me anyway, because who wants to be me? Nobody wants to be me at all. Not really. They'd like to have what I have, but they don't want to pay the price of being me.
You see, what's interesting about you, you're incredibly modest and you like putting yourself down, and you live quite a modest life, although it's quite a showbiz surrounding. We're here in your home today, which looks over a beautiful park, and you've got the things around you. You've never wanted to be part of the London set and the showbiz hedonistic people that go out doing drugs and getting in all the papers, have you really?
That was a lifestyle that never really appealed to me. I've got a place in London, in the posh part. In actual, I've got 5 places that I go to, from Scottish Highlands right down to Bournemouth and things like that. And people say, "Them 5 places, don't they cost you a lot?" And I say, all 5 of them put together is cheaper than one wife. And they say, oh, don't remind me, Jim. Oh, do not remind me.
cadre de la télévision. Ça vaut les parrains d'hôpitaux ou d'institutions pour enfants. Tous les établissements ont depuis décidé de retirer ce parrainage encombrant.
See, so it's all a bit of fun. It's all the nonsense.
Are you happy? I think that's the question that a lot of people have about you. We saw you on that Louis Theroux thing, and you're curious. There's no question that you have an odd life and deliberately play up to it, in my opinion. Have you enjoyed your life, and are you enjoying your life?
1000%, because I never really wanted to be anything. I never really wanted to do anything. As a volunteer porter at Leeds Infirmary, I never ever wanted to be a doctor, because I couldn't have the time or the inclination to study, and then only know a lot about one facet of society, right? But yet, because I've been nearly 50 years at the sharp end of hospitals, obviously I've picked up a lot. And only last week, as I'm speaking to you, did I deliver my first medical lecture at the Royal College of Medicine in London, and it was a full house. And they come from all over the world, these people.
What were you talking about?
Well, the title of the lecture was, "Don't worry, radiation is good for you."
Un scandale qui prend une nouvelle tournure depuis que la BBC est mise en cause pour avoir caché les pratiques de son animateur.
I know nothing at all about radiation, and they'd come from all over the world, and it was a packed house, and I got a standing ovation, and none of them can remember what I said.
I was once told my voice is a bit like a chain coming off a motorbike. How would you describe it?
No, that's somebody having a go at you. It's a joke. I wouldn't say that at all. I don't think of people that way. You are what you are. You are halfway up the ladder of success, and with a bit of luck, you'll get up the top ladder of success. But like I did say to you, and I'll let the people know what I said to you earlier on, that if I walk down the street with a tracksuit on and a cigar in my hand and long hair and all that sort of stuff, and John Lennon glasses, actually the Jimmy Savile glasses, because I used to wear these, and John saw these and he started to wear them. John, he was my pal for long enough, and so they'll go and they'll say, "Oh, I've just seen him walking down Briggate." Right, now if you walk down Briggate, that'll be it. Now, if you wanted to get anywhere, you've got to make sure that when you pass somebody, they're going to say, "Who the hell is that?"
Yeah, but that's the difference between you and me, James. I don't want to be noticed. You do like it. You see, I like the radio. I'm hidden behind a microphone. I do my show. I go home, and then I can get on with my life. You like being noticed.
Yes. You see, that's where we split. You want to do your thing on the radio, and you want to go home and do your thing privately. I never wanted to do my thing privately, because there was no difference in between my job and my life. It was all the same. It was all the same. And that's why I do the things that I do. For instance, I own the National Spinal Injury Centre at Stoke Mandeville, which I built. Now, I single-handedly got all of £20 million to build that and designed it on the back of a menu, all like people do. And you learn things, you are things, but I don't change once I walk in there, or once I walk into the LGI. I don't change. I am me, for no reason other than I quite enjoy being me, and it's good fun, and that's the name of the game, good fun. But you run the risk of being normal. Now, if you run the risk of being normal,
En déprogrammant une émission diffusée seulement hier, la chaîne a été contrainte de s'en excuser.
It's been a bad day for the BBC.
you'll get normal wages and a normal lifestyle. But if you want to be abnormal, like me, I've had 36 Rolls Royces and all sorts of things, but I prefer running marathons.
I want to talk to you about the things I've learned about you. One is that you created John Lennon's image. That's what you're telling me, because he nicked the idea of your glasses.
I didn't say I created his image. The Beatles, when they lived in Liverpool and before they became famous, I had a disco in Manchester called the Three Coins, and it was in a street called Fountain Street, 3 coins in the fountain. And they came and played there. Nobody knew them at the time, and lo and behold, I was on a TV show, their very, very first TV show. And when I got back to Manchester, Mallet said, "With them Beatles?" And I said, "Yes." They worked here. I said, "Give over. Never work here." He said, "Yes, they worked here twice." And I went and got the wages book, and it said, "Beatles, £5. That's all they got to travel from Liverpool. And it said underneath, "Went down well." So they came back 3 weeks later for £15, right? So they were my pals, but they were my pals in a more deeper sense than pals, because I was part of their early life. And then I did my thing and won all the awards that I won. I've won about 140 different awards, right? And they did their thing, so there was a rapport between us. And shall I tell you a quick Beatles story? I was going on an airplane to America to meet Elvis. Never seen him before, never knew him before, and there was no real reason why I should have gone, just because I was a chancer. And he'd sold 1,186,000 copies of It's Now or Never. And they said at the record company, "Oh, he's got a gold record." I said, "I'll take it to him." And they said, "What do you know about that?" I said, "Well, I'd actually won an air trip to Los Angeles for something that I'd done. And he lived near there. So I said, I'll take it to him." And I managed to get hold of a telephone number where somebody who knows Elvis in his business might know where he was. That's all I had, just a scrap of paper. And on the same plane that I got on, by an amazing fluke, were the Beatles. They were going to America. And Cilla Black. It wasn't. Yeah, it was Cilla Black, because she was the cloakroom girl at the disco, the Cavern. And so we all had this great meeting down at London Airport. So we're flying away, and it was one of them boring periods. And John comes and sits down and he says, "All right, King Solomon, what are we doing wrong?" Which was something to say, because, I mean, they were top of the world, you know. And I said, he said, "Oh, come on, what are we doing wrong?" I said, "Well, John, you're flying 3,000 miles to work. And I'm going to see a fella called Elvis who lives in America, and he doesn't even go there. You can get Elvis out of the sunshine and the this and the other. His records, yes. And you can check out the Beatles never toured again. Individually, they did, because Paul likes touring, right? But the Beatles as a group never toured again, because I was going to see a fella that lived in America and never even went there. And they were flying 3,000 miles. To what? To earn money for promoters, to earn money for agents. But what were they doing for themselves, except travelling 3,000 miles?
So the next set of questions I have to ask you is, does it ever become normal when someone like Paul McCartney or John Lennon knows you and wants to talk to you, and before you've even said anything, they're curious about you?
Well, I don't know whether they're curious or not. I think they might want to know something in relation. I mean, John came and sat with me because he wanted to know if I could suss out and diagnose what they might be doing wrong. Because he was sat on a plane for 7 hours or whatever it is, travelling 3,000 miles, and he couldn't work out why he was doing that. But he suddenly realised he was doing it to make money for other people that he didn't even know.
But can't you see how special that makes you, that despite all those people around him, half of which were having him sat there do that, he chose you to ask that question?
Well, he did that because he thought I could have the answer because I was odd. And if you're odd, you might have just have the answer to the question. You see, I never ever thought, for instance, that I was clever. Tricky, yes. I'm a very tricky fella. But tricky is much better than being clever.
But you are clever because you're in Mensa.
No, that's an accident. That's an accident. And if you are clever, you can slip up because you're clever. But if you're tricky, you don't slip up. You never slip up if you're tricky. No, because you're tricky.
You can get out of it.
Yes, if something comes in front of you, whoa, can you get out of it? Because you're tricky. You can skate round it.
We're back with Sir Jimmy Savile on The Big Show, talking to the man who really mastered show business and understands the business of show seemingly more than anyone else. Because that's the point, isn't it? It is a business.
Yes, it is a business, but it is a good business. It's a lovely business, and it's a business that promotes and sells pleasure. So there's no reason why all that pleasure cannot enter your own life. The only reason where show business is not a pleasure is when people forget what it is. It's a pleasurable business. It's a fun business. It's not, you're not Einstein or anything like that, and you don't want a Nobel Peace Prize. You have a good time. And if you have a good time, that is addictive and that's communicative, and other people have a good time, so you all have a good time. It's a good time business.
Why do people in management these days take it so much more seriously and accountants get involved? I mean, it's not so much fun anymore, is it? It's more of accountants making money out of you.
Well, what happens is that everybody wants a piece of the action. And so today, as I'm speaking to you, everybody, if you've got £1 in your pocket, somebody somewhere wants it. And they will come up with all sorts of reasons why you should give them £1 out of your pocket. It could be your last pound, they don't care about that. But they want your money. Now that is a feature today. It wasn't like that 60 years ago, but it is today. So the whole world changes, and every time I get up in the morning, I almost tend to forget what happened yesterday. But I know that today is a new day, there's new strokes for new folks, and they're all going to come and try and cop for a few quid off me, and they've got no chance at all. Because if I was a ghost, I wouldn't even give them a fright, you see.
What's your life about now? Because the show business days have passed. You're not doing primetime BBC One anymore. 18 million people in your heyday loved you week in and week out. As you sit here, as I'm looking at you now, how do you fill your days? What do you do with your time to bring that happiness?
Wonderful. First of all, I'm a rare breed insofar as I'm a single fella, and which is why when people say, "Them 5 places you've got to live in, aren't they expensive?" And I said, not as expensive as a wife. Now, it's a bit cynical, is that? But my game was not to have 1 wife, to have 1,000. Now, 1,000 wives, it makes your hair go white. Did you know that? And it keeps you slim. And you get people chasing you and looking for you and want to chin you and all that sort of stuff. But all there was an oil drip, and that's where you were yesterday, and you've gone. Right.
Are you saying you were a stud muffin?
No, I don't even know what that is. But all I know is that most people want 1 wife. I quite fancied having 1,000, like King Solomon. It was terrific. I think them sheikhs of old, where they had the harems and all that,
Why couldn't you find one special person? Did you ever dream of that, or did it never matter?
Yeah, I tried every day. And then by 5 o'clock I found that wasn't a special person, but I might find it tomorrow. And it was, in fact, my case comes up on Thursday.
How hedonistic was your life? How showbiz, how fun was it? I don't want to be too graphic, but I mean, you were in a line of business where a lot of people knew you. In the clubs, you were a sex symbol. Was it good being Jimmy Savile?
I have been other people. When I worked down the pit, for instance, and I got 74 pence a week down there, 13 and 9 pence in old money I got, and I was somebody else then, because I didn't know that this world existed. It didn't exist because there was something on called a war, and that really alters life for everybody. And I went through 6 years of World War II. That formed me into a completely different person. And when I came out of the pit and went to join a scheme called Lend a Hand on the Land, which meant you could volunteer because you needed food, needed this, that and the other. So working on the land to me was fantastic. I did that for about 6 or 7 months. Oh, yeah, that was wonderful. And then I thought, hang about, it's too good, is this? Sunshine, girls working in the fields with us, and all. You could always dodge behind a haystack, and they're all wonderful things. And I thought, no, the clock of life is ticking away, and I think I need a few quid somehow. And so I started to run dances and discos and things like that. Didn't make any money much, but I got the name as a promoter, an entrepreneur, and things like that. And I played records as well, which was not done before. And I had a pal that invented things, and he invented a record player with an electric motor, so he didn't have to wind it up. And the speaker that I had on this particular machine was 2.5 inches. That was all. Now look at the speakers today on concerts. Mine was 2.5 inches. But I ran dances. My first dance I ran here in Leeds. And I wrote some tickets out, and it says, Grand Record Dance, 1 shilling. And 12 people turned up.
I want to talk about your DJ days more in a moment. I just want to go back to the war days, because you told me an incredible story before we started taping about, again, your knowledge and your ability to read. That was something that was unique around the people that you lived with, and it came in very, very useful for some of the worst reasons.
Well, when I was about 12, 13, still at school, I went to what was known locally as the Poor Children's School, because all our people were either in orphanages or homes or whatever. If you didn't have any money, they were called elementary schools. There aren't any now, but they were known locally as Poor Children's School. And I could read, sure, that's fair dues. And during the war, telegrams were delivered to houses. And if a telegram got delivered to a house, it meant bad news, because somebody had always been missing in action or something like that. And people never opened their telegrams. They'd find somebody who could read. And because I could read, I did the whole block of streets around where I was. Is Jimmy in? We've got a telegram. Can you come and read it? And I'd go and open the telegram, and I'd say, I'd read the thing. This is to report that so-and-so has been killed in action. And before me, the entire family had collapsed. And I used to put the telegram on the table, get up and walk out and wait for the next one. So that's why going through 6 years of World War II was very formative. You didn't know you were being formed because you didn't know anything else. All you knew is you weren't going to sleep all night because an air raid siren was starting to get them, and you'd go down to the basement. I could never understand why we actually went down in the basement, because if a bomb dropped, the house would drop on top of you. You see, but for some reason everybody run down to the basement, and I thought that was very strange. And I suppose that was one of the first times I started to question what by then was law, which was your parents. Your parents were law, and they said, "Hey, go, everybody downstairs." And it was more than my life was worth to say, why do we go downstairs? Why not go upstairs and fall on top of the house instead of the house falling on top of us?
You know, the emotional baggage of reading those letters and passing on that information,
Yeah.
did that stay with you, or were you able to somehow decompartmentalize it and put it aside?
No, there was no emotion at all. I didn't know what dead was. I didn't know what the war was. We knew there was something called a war, but we didn't know what it was for. We didn't know anything about it. It was a war, and all of a sudden there was something called rationing, and there was ration books. We hadn't the faintest idea why any of that was about, but it was, and you just got used to it, that's all. And it was only when you grew up, and you grew older, that you realised what a war was, which was stupidity, and it's somebody somewhere had got power, and they were called politicians, and they went a bridge too far, and then they got other politicians to say, well, we must declare war on these politicians, right? Very strange, very odd, and not for me.
Coming back next, we're going to talk about your mum and dad. I know your mum was incredibly important in your life and still is. We'll do that after we take another piece of music. Who do you still love listening to now, all these years later after you played them on the radio?
I've got a very wide taste, which means I've got no taste. And I just turn the radio on, and whatever, that'll do for me. It doesn't matter whether it's a serious subject or a non-serious subject. I'll have a little listen, and after a few minutes, that's enough for me. And I'm off down the road, training for the next marathon.
You're no good for me. I need loyal listeners.
Yeah, well, you'll get whatever you want. And not only will you get whatever you want, you'll also get whatever you deserve.
We're back with Sir Jimmy Savile, talking to him about his life and his remarkable career. I want to talk about mum and dad, because your mum, the Duchess, was so important in your life, and we really got to learn about that with that Louis Theroux documentary. It was a big part of it. Do you think they misled us as to what was going on there? Because you still have items of clothing, for example, and some people found that strange.
Well, strange to them, not strange to me. Everybody that is listening to this programme, hundreds of millions of people, will have photographs of departed relatives, departed friends, pictures of their loved ones. Pictures are all right, but when the Duchess went off, quite suddenly, as it happens, and I came home, because we lived together, just by convenience and coincidence, not through emotion or anything like that, because she thought I was a thief, because she realised that money came from working, and I didn't work, and I got all this money, and there was cars and houses and things like that, and she was convinced I was a thief, and she used to worry, and she would say to people, I don't know what he does, but it's not what he says he does on the radio. I think he's a thief, you know, and I've told him to be careful every time he leaves the house. And so for me, why keep a photograph, which of course I've got, but why not keep the clothes, or not all the clothes, but dresses and things like that she wore when I would take her somewhere, because I quite enjoyed taking her to places. Because I was the youngest of 7, 4 sisters and 2 brothers, and I was not the favourite by any means, because I was a not again child. When she was telling the neighbours she was up the tub, they'd say, not again. So I'm a not again child. So I wasn't a favourite by any means. But we had this great sort of rapport, and she was quite small, and she had natural golden hair, and she was very kidnappable. When I took her anywhere, that was her finished. Somebody had oystered her and taken her away, and when I wanted to go home, I'd have to go looking for her, you see. And it was a great sort of relationship. She never trusted me because she thought I was going to get nicked. Finish up, banged up in the pokey, and she was good fun to have around, but she was 100% naive. She'd had 7 kids, she didn't even know where babies come from. She hadn't the faintest idea. It was amazing. So we had this great sort of rapport, and when she went, I thought, well, there's no point in her going. Not really. So instead of keeping just pictures, I keep a few dresses and things. And I've got them hanging up in a wardrobe. And occasionally, when I open the wrong wardrobe, and there's a dress, and I think, oh, she wore that when we went to see the Pope. Because I said to her one day, you want to come to Rome? And she said, yes, why? I said, I'm going to see the Pope. She said, don't joke like that. She said, you don't want to see the Pope? I said, I am. Do you want to come and see me? Don't be silly. And when we got to Rome, she was convinced that we were in Jersey. Because she'd had a glass of wine on the plane and cigar and said, it's Jersey. And I said, why are they speaking Italian? She said, they speak all foreign languages in Jersey. And so things like that, those are star things, but there's no sort of emotion as emotion there. And so I keep a lot of her gear, not through emotion, I keep it through common sense. And to me, the gear that she wore when we went to see the Pope, even though she thought she was in Jersey, is too good to throw away.
She must have been incredibly proud of you, because most sons don't get to take their mum to see the Pope.
No, she was completely bewildered. She was more bewildered than proud. She never got around to being proud, I don't think. No, because if anybody said, oh, what's Jimmy like? Oh, I keep warning him, you know. Oh, I don't know what he's up to, but he's up to something. He never get this sort of money, you know, by doing what he's supposed to do. So it was a very strange one-off relationship, and it suited both of us.
And in terms of the money you mention, did you ever have a conscience about that? I know some stars magnanimously offer it back and say, no, I can't take that. Kenneth Williams was renowned for turning down money. How did you cope with it? I mean, you're just an average lad from Leeds.
Yeah, no, I only needed what I needed. And if I got any more, I've got the ability to make a few quid, because I'm tricky, like I said. And so I don't mind giving it to people that need it. Like, for instance, when I was building the spinal centre at Stoke Mandeville, that needed £20 million. Now, how do you get £20 million? It's not easy, but I love the prospect of it. And I didn't have a shilling. And I said, yeah, all right, I'll build a place for you. But getting it was a hoot from start to finish. And if you're lucky, for instance, in the 1986 London Marathon, I was sponsored for £286,000. And there was much moaning and groaning on the race, because I was getting 1,000,000 times more than the winner. Because I suddenly realised that coming last, you get far more money than coming first. Far more. And there's a lot less hassle, because if you come first, you've got to train like a good one. But if you come last, all you've got to do, and what I used to do with the marathons, and this, you know, for somebody like you, it's an example of having a laugh, having a good time. I would set off the marathon with a big cigar in my mouth, right, and I'd charge off down the road, and people say, oh, this is Jimmy, look, oh, he's got a cigar in his mouth. And about 200 yards down the road, I'd take it out, and one of my minders would be standing by the roadside, and I'd give it to him, right, and then I'd go and do 26 miles, and he would come about 300 yards from the finish, light the cigar, because you could hear me coming, because the people shouting and carrying on, and I'd cop for the cigar and finish smoking the cigar. Right, smoke coming out of it, and this, and that, and the other. And people, God bless them, especially newspapermen, and I'd love that, they'd say, how many cigars do you smoke on the way around, Jim? I say, 4 or 5. And it was the same one. It was a con job. That's called being tricky. And being tricky is better than being intelligent.
I'm learning fast. What do you rate to the smoking ban? Because, of course, you can't go in your restaurants and pubs now smoking your cigar.
I can. Because I don't go in those pubs and restaurants and things like that. And anyway, nobody takes advantage of an 84-year-old pensioner who limps a bit. I limp on purpose. And I bend over a bit on purpose. And I hang on to backs of chairs. And the side of the post sod.
We're back with our remaining moments with Sir Jimmy Savile, the man who changed telly in many ways, but it seems to me would rather have been a sporting star. It's always kind of knocked you because you love sport, don't you?
It's the last thing I ever wanted to be. The last thing I ever wanted to be was a sporting star. Because a sporting star, you had to train properly, you had to do properly, and you had to be a mentality. Me, I was a good fun person. I loved it. And when you're into it for fun, it's amazing because that's addictive and it's also communicative and it's infectious. So I was having fun and I was letting other people have fun, and companies would say to me, will you sponsor our product? Not because I liked their product, it's just that I was a fun person and I didn't take liberties, and you know, I wasn't sticking white powder up my nose or anything silly like that. And so I would get jobs. For instance, I did mention that on the 1986 London Marathon, I was sponsored for £286,000, which was far more than the winner got. Who wants to be a winner when you can get loot like that for just having a good nobble? And giving a cigar away at 200 yards and getting it back 300 yards from the finish and all that sort of stuff. And the following year, somebody came and said, we'd like to, what do you want? So I said, have you got any cars? And they said, what do you want? I said, a Lamborghini. So they gave me a new Lamborghini. Now, you go to see any of your sports stars. Has anybody ever given you a Lamborghini? They said, bloody haven't, no.
Welcome Her Majesty the Queen to the heart of BBC Broadcasting House and our live newsroom.
Yes, it's a view that we share with our audience every day, but today a unique moment with a very special royal guest.
We looked at this, I looked at it and said, okay, this company seems very odd. They do a lot of stuff and they seem to say they can do anything. Well, that can't be true. So I assumed that it was just PR and nonsense. Nope, it's true. They can do anything. Anything. From steal patents, to spy on satellites, to create new coronavirus retroviruses that can be a pandemic that can depopulate the world, that can have every type of satellite hookup link that you can possibly imagine. So that means that they're spying. They're connected to the military, and in a strange way, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it, Michael, when your researchers uncovered this, and then you found where it was, and this character, Lord Pirbright, which you're going to tell us about today. But I'm sorry, when this happened, my head exploded, and so that's the reason I have to talk about this today. To find out that Lord Pirbright is Henry de Worms, whose father was Solomon de Worms, who was a Rothschild, and Solomon de Worms basically fleeced Ceylon, the entire island. And he's a Rothschild. And so he set up a beautiful example for Henry de Worms to come back to England and to do it there, and then basically to be, at least idealistically, a beautiful teacher for Cecil Rhodes. We were trying to figure out, where did Cecil Rhodes get all that evil, that imperialistic desire for empire to put everyone below them that isn't part of the Anglo-white race? We couldn't quite get that. We know about Lord Shelburne and others, and the British East India Company. But no, I had totally missed Henry de Worms. Never heard of him. Little did I know that the importance that he has in all of this. So you're going to try to take what I'm saying, which is a very broad picture, because what we're saying is kinetic seems to be the place that Serco's information gets fed into, that Five Eyes gets fed into, that the British military gets fed into. In other words, this is like what we would call the rogue CIA. So this could be a rogue British intelligence group that creates viruses, that spies on everything that is digital. It has been doing this for a long, long time, and that these places in Pirbright are all connected, and it seems as if you have hit the jackpot of basically the Queen's corporate control of the British military, United Kingdom, Five Eyes intelligence sharing with America, and basically everything else. Because if you can create a virus, like look how many billions of dollars China is losing because a British virus got released somehow in China. So when you look at this, you can say, oh, the British have never stopped. They're the inventors of germ warfare. The British are. And if you invent something really great like that, then you're going to get the Order of the British Empire, or you're going to get knighted by the Queen. And for sure, no matter what, as long as this is, the land that is basically owned by Lord Pirbright, Henry de Worms Rothschild, that it's also mixed with the military. So the Queen's immunity comes into this company because it looks as if the Carlyle Group, when it folded, because everybody found out this group that George H.W. Bush joined after he was the president, and he went from being a millionaire to a billionaire in 1 year because they had 400 military contractors underneath one banner called Carlyle. Carlyle comes over and buys a huge share of the company we're talking about, Kinetic. Not only that, again, because of the excellent researchers, we have found that the Queen owns the controlling shares of this company. So this is no joke. This is no conspiracy. We know the people who were involved, and the only thing we couldn't get was the question I asked you a couple days ago, and I said, I don't get it. I don't get it, Mike. Ask your researchers the following. This place we're talking about, this company, Kinetic, isn't just on one place. It's like got many, many places in England. Some of them are literally military bases. But this group, who is this group? Well, and how can they control spying on satellites if they don't have the crypto keys? And you turned immediately to me and said, Michael Chertoff is part of this group, as well as we would know that Arvinder Sambhai and the controller for Robert Mueller, they have crypto keys. So there's the crypto keys. The only part that I hadn't been able to put into the puzzle to say, it looks like this group can do anything from accelerated particle beams that can literally shoot satellites out of the sky to spy on anything, anywhere, at any time under the complete immunity of the Queen's monarchy in a militaristic, corporate, rogue kind of NSA, CIA corporation that is huge. So that is just my little thumbnail of what you have discovered. I don't know how you're going to pick up what I've just said, because there's 1,000 ways to go that you have already proven all of these things. So, Michael, I know we haven't had time to stand back. That's the reason I'm ranting like a fool. But when you're standing back now and looking at this, what do you think you found with Kinetic?
We found a missing piece, and you said it earlier. It was the missing piece of who was directing Cecil Rhodes, who was running cover for Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Milner, because they weren't operated. They didn't just start. Somebody got them in the business. And we need to go back to the beginning of this research, which was...
And say, well, how come he got one? Oh, well, he's him. He's different.
Did you ever find a resentment in show business that you have this power, the power of the public to get the money, the power of your celebrity to get the endorsements? Let's go back, let's say 20 years.
They think I'm odd. That's all they think. They said, well, we can't sort of put a rule to him or anything because he's odd. And if you're odd, you're odd. I'm quite used to being odd. In fact, I actually think myself that I'm odd. And it's something that if you are, you are. And you can't suddenly not be odd. You're just odd, period.
What are you most proud of? You've done so many things in your life, aside from your charity stuff, actually, because that's the most honourable thing you do, and you do it so brilliantly. I don't think there's anybody in show business raises more money and gives more money away than yourself.
Was who owns this coronavirus? And one of our folks went and looked at the patent office, and it was easy to find this coronavirus is owned by the British Pirbright Institute. And of course, none of us had heard of it. In fact, we haven't focused on viruses and vaccines at all in any of our research over the last 7, 8, 9 years. So we took some time to look at it, and this the Pirbright Institute, it's called, has a nefarious history, which is all tied up in the British government and, as you said, in its early experiments in germ warfare and chemical warfare, and the development of vaccines through the Burroughs Wellcome company, Henry Wellcome. So the time frame we're talking about, when it now is very clear, a lot of the current attempts by the new British Empire, I'll call it, to continue developing a British control of the world along with America. It happened in the 1880s forward, and a lot of things got going right then. And it was puzzling how these people were able to operate down in South Africa and in the U.S. and in their relations with the British Empire of the world.
Professionally, what are you most proud of?
Waking up this morning. Simple, sensible, honest, but I think that waking up this morning was one of the star parts of my life. And this morning I woke up, let me think, I was on my own, and that is tremendous.
How often do you wake up in the morning and have to check to see whether there is somebody on the other side?
Well, not very often, because what happens, I'm a pushover, and if somebody comes and knocks on the door and says, I've lost my key to go in, I'll say, step this way. And they say, I thought you'd say that. It's not my fault. I can't help it. I'm a single fella.
There's nothing wrong with it. You haven't broken any laws, have you?
Without knowing who in Parliament was really providing them cover. And so the Pirbright Institute came up. So we just started looking, where is this? It's about 7 miles from Guildford, which is it's a bedroom community of West London. And it's a very nice area. I've booked Christian music concerts in that area many times. And it's very pretty to drive through. And then stuck on an estate just south of the little village of Pirbright, and it is truly a little village, is the Pirbright Institute. And it's this very large facility, which you can see from satellites, many buildings. You go on their website, and they boast of having funding from the likes of Bill and Melinda Gates, the Wellcome Trust, which, by the way, those are the two largest foundations providing grants on the planet. Bill Gates Foundation is number one, and the Wellcome Trust is number two. And then you go down their list on their documents, and you see the European Commission, you see that's the EU, you see the World Health Organization, and on and on. So there's a lot of money and influence in that Pirbright Institute. So we said, well, why did they name it Pirbright? And to cut a long story short, they named it Pirbright after the first Lord Pirbright, who became a baron, and he was given that title by Queen Victoria.
None whatsoever. And if I do, well, I'll stand for that as well.
You talk about waking up in the morning. What about not waking up in the morning and being back with your mum? Do you think about that?
No, she'll have gone to heaven. I mean, I've lost my life a few times, one way and another, believe me. But I'm not quite sure. The religious department at the BBC once asked me if I'd write a book. So I said, yes, all right then. So I wrote a book, and the fences there, but we called the book God Will Fix It, right? And it sold for over nearly 40 years through Mowbray's, the religious publishers. And it's an odd book, but very palatable, which is why it sold for all those years. And the last page is that question that you just asked me about not waking up. And if I arrive at the gates of heaven and St. Peter says, you've been a very tricky man, you can't come in here, I'll break his thumbs.
And he has two actual names, and I'll just go with the second one. His name is Henry de Worms, 1st Baron Pirbright. That's his full name that's on most histories. And as we dug deeper into this Pirbright person, there's a couple of angles we can go here, but let me just stick on the family. Henry de Worms is married to a Rothschild, and he is the great-grandson of Amschel Rothschild, who started the Rothschild banking dynasty. So he is obviously a very connected individual, and we've learned further that when he was a young man, he lived in Ceylon with his father, Solomon, as you said, on the Rothschild estate. The Rothschild connection is on his mom's side, by the way. And they traded tea, coffee, and no doubt spices for the British East India Company, who the Rothschilds are well known to have funded for hundreds of years. So he comes back to England, and he was given Austrian titles. He and his family were given Austrian titles, which Queen Victoria recognized, and so therefore he became an immediate peer of the British realm. And he must have been a good speaker, because in the 1880s he was a member of Parliament from 86 to 92.
Because I'm qualified to do that, because I earned a living being a wrestler. And I've never had a problem yet with anybody whose thumbs I've broke.
You talk about that, though, as if there's reasons for you going downstairs. Do you have a conscience about that? Is there stuff you've done that you think will deny you access to the big man?
No. I never brought any harm to anybody. I've never bad-mouthed anybody. It sounds a bit yucky, but it's my nature, it's my lifestyle, and I never thought there was a profit in being bad. There might be a profit for a few days, a few weeks, even a few years, but sooner or later you get your comeuppance. And so the best thing to do, I mean, I know a million bad people, I know them, but I've no desire to be one, only because it's not my nature. If it's not your nature, then you're not, holier than thou or gooder than thou. It's just not your nature, full stop.
That is one of the most bizarre bits of television that the BBC has produced for some time.
And during that time, he was the Minister of Trade, which is one of the most powerful positions in the British Parliament and the British Cabinet. And then he was the Minister for the Colonies. So from that 86 to 92, he was a very powerful man in the UK and the British Empire. And it was exactly during that time, for example, that David Livingstone and Henry M. Stanley, the explorer that is supposed to have famously said, Mr. Livingstone, I presume, he went on numerous expeditions to Africa. And on the surface, he was supposed to be looking for David Livingstone. But what we now conclude is that Stanley was a mercenary. He was a promoter.
And what about your legacy? Will it be the charity stuff we talk about more than Jim will fix it? Because that's the thing we immediately associate with you.
I ain't going. It's too good here. I am probably the only person that you ever will speak to that had a death certificate written out when I was 2 years old. But when I was 2 years old, something was wrong with me. And so in those days, they went with the doctor, but doctors didn't have cars. They had to walk with the bag in their hand. And the doctor came around, took one look at me and said, right, that's it, and wrote out a death certificate, left it on the sideboard in the bedroom. But I didn't die. So the next morning, the Duchess got 2 pence, which was a phone call in those days. I took a phone call and phoned the doctor and said, he's still alive. Oh, says the doctor, I'll come round. So he walked round on his rounds and he said, so he is. And he got the death certificate and tore it up. And that was it. So there's not many people who speak to us had a death certificate torn up by the very doctor that wrote the damn thing out.
As the Queen makes her way past.
Let me just end by throwing some names at you of the people you've met, because you've met some incredible people, worked with them. Elvis, what was he like?
Elvis was fantastic. What a wonderful, wonderful fella. He really was. He was a bit like myself insofar as all he wanted was a good time. That's why he never went anywhere. He wanted the sunshine, he wanted his pals, he wanted to do his karate, and he wanted to do this, that and the other, and he'd make a record, he'd make $1 million out of a record, so he didn't feel he had to go. He was a marvellous guy. I was with him in LA, and we were in a car showroom, and he said, come and look at my new car. And so when there's this marvellous drop-head Cadillac, and I'm saying, oh, that's terrific, and this, that and the other was in the window. And there was a man and a woman looking through the window, and they see Elvis. They didn't know who I was from a dog's dinner, but they see Elvis, and Elvis, and he looked at it, and he was shy, and that was what made him devastating, because he was shy. And he went, and he beckoned them in, and he said, hello. And said, oh, Elvis said, and the other, he said, do you like my new car? And they said, yeah. And he said to the fella, he says, have you got another one? And he says, not the same colour, sir. And he said, well, that's it. And he said, that's yours. And they gave him the exact car by a different colour. And with somebody that's got a style like that, I mean, he was a tremendous good. Who else do you want to know about?
Sinatra. Did you meet him?
Frank. Yes, Frank, it was a completely different world, because that was the world, with respect, of villainry. Now, Frank wasn't a villain, but because he was an enormous star, the villains, easy to understand, call them mafia. The mafia, they treated stars like pets, like pet dogs and pet cats, right? And they always had to have a star, right? And Frank was one of the biggest, so he knew all the top people. And so I was going from Elvis in LA to Las Vegas, and so I was Frank Sinatra's guest at the Sands Hotel. It got pulled down not long since, and when I got there, Frank was coming, but unfortunately he was with JFK in Washington, and the snow came and his plane couldn't take off, so he didn't actually get there some another time, but he didn't get there that time. But because I was there, he put his pals, unbelievable villains, they were all old geezers, fat geezers, and they sat in chairs, and all this, that and the other. And what happened was, out into the desert, there was a club called El Casa Vegas, right? And he was the referee in between the two teams, which were the Sands team and the DI team, the Desert Inn team, and he was the man that bought peace with them until the two teams put together, and then they said to him, right, who do you want to be with? He said, I don't want to be with anybody. They said, well, you can't be on your own. It's untidy, you know, we're all together now, one or the other. No. So they burnt his place down whilst I was there.
This Grand Lodge is this year 128 years old. It is the oldest Grand Lodge in Australasia. In that time, we have had 32 Grand Masters. They have come from governors of the state. They have been High Court judges, lawyers, prominent businessmen.
Burnt it to the ground. There was people running about the desert with his pyjamas on and things like that. And I saw the confrontation when he come in to the Sands. He come into the Sands and he put his arms out like this and he says, why? And they said, Jaime, what's wrong? What's wrong? He says, you burnt the place down. He says, Jaime, just a minute. Are you married to my cousin's sister? You know it. Well, that makes you family. No, yes, it does. Now, sit down. And they calmed him down, and that was it. And he didn't have to join either one or the other because he didn't have a place left. It had been burnt to the ground.
Incredible. And of all the people you met, who was the most interesting? Did anybody make you starstruck?
No, not starstruck. I have an enormous respect for people. And it doesn't matter whether it's a hospital porter who... One of my pals I worked with for years and years and years and years, called Joe, he had my enormous respect because he was worth it. So I have respect for people, but not necessarily starstruck as such. Although I enjoy seeing them. But respect is far more important than being starstruck.
Do you have to also keep the balance with your job, that you're not walked over and made a fool of, and that you don't suffer fools gladly?
I don't mind being walked over. People have tried to walk over me all their life. Finish up with a broken leg, that's all right.
Talking of your wrestling days, I noticed a poster on the wall down there. You love that. Did I read 35 matches, 35 losses?
Yeah, the first 35 fights, because no wrestler wanted to go home and say he'd been beaten by a long-haired disc jockey.
As was Pirbright, and one of their objectives was clearly to find poisons and cures in Africa, which Wellcome could then commercialize and distribute through the Wellcome laboratories. And at the same time, he was on a mission for the British East India Company to acquire the wealth of West Africa, especially the mining wealth in gold and diamonds. And he was closely teamed with the Rothschilds because he was involved with the setup of the British South Africa Company in Parliament. And we have the actual records of the parliamentary discussions on this, where they set up a corporation called the British South Africa Company, which Rhodes was the leader, at the same time as N.M. Rothschild, another great-grandson, along with Baron Pirbright, funded the De Beers Diamond and Mining and Gold Company, and that became one of the chief funders of this British South Africa Corporation. And one of the most interesting aspects of this is they developed it so that it was a corporation that would run South Africa, not the British government, but this corporation. And this corporation would collect taxes, it would run its police force, and it would be independently operated.
Schwab Family Values, an investigation into the past of Klaus Schwab, by Johnny Vedmore, published by unlimitedhangout.com. This reading by Alex Thompson commences after the introduction to the article. On the 10th of July 1870, Klaus Schwab's grandfather, Jakob Wilhelm Gottfried Schwab, referred to later as simply Gottfried, was born in a Germany at war with its French neighbours. Karlsruhe, the town where Gottfried Schwab was born, was located in the Grand Duchy of Baden, ruled in 1870 by the 43-year-old Grand Duke of Baden, Frederick I. The following year, the aforementioned Duke would be present at the proclamation of the German Empire, which took place in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. He was the only son-in-law of the incumbent emperor, Wilhelm I, and, as Frederick I, was one of the reigning sovereigns of Germany. By the time Gottfried Schwab turned 18 years old, Germany would see Wilhelm II take the throne, upon the death of his father, Frederick III. In 1893, a 23-year-old Gottfried Schwab would officially depart Germany, giving up his German citizenship and leaving Karlsruhe in order to emigrate to Switzerland.
Now, that sounds very much like a fascist organization. And what we now see is that this was the origins of what we're going to call British imperial fascist corporatism. I know that's a lot of words. British imperial meaning under the Queen. Fascist corporatism means the Queen is going to give special, Queen or King, give special positions to these corporations as long as they pay their fealty to the monarch and pay their taxes.
At the time, his occupation was noted as being that of a simple baker. Here, Gottfried would meet Marie Lappert, who was from Kirchberg, near Bern, Switzerland, and who was 5 years his junior. They would marry in Roggwil, Bern, on the 27th of May 1898. And the following year, on the 27th of April 1899, their child, Eugen Schwab, was born. At the time of his birth, Gottfried Schwab had moved up in the world, having become a machine engineer. When Eugen was around 1 year old, Gottfried and Marie Schwab decided to return to live in Karlsruhe, and Gottfried reapplied for German citizenship. Eugen Schwab would follow in the footsteps of his father, and also became a machine engineer. And in future years, he would advise his children to do the same. Eugen Schwab would eventually begin working at a factory in a town in Upper Swabia, in southern Germany, capital of the district of Ravensburg, the present-day German state of Baden-Württemberg. The factory where Eugen would forge his career was the German branch of a Swiss company named Escher Wyss.
And so at every point when members of parliament tried to question this arrangement, they were shut down. And it was Henry de Worms, first Baron Pirbright, that led the suppression of any criticism of this new British South Africa company, which the Rothschilds were also invested in. So here we've got Henry Wellcome collecting drugs to be sent back to the UK, and Wellcome has got a facility through the trust on the Pirbright property. And in addition to that, the explorer Stanley has a tomb, memorial, monument at the Pirbright Church.
Switzerland had many long-standing economic ties to the Ravensburg area, with Swiss traders in the early 19th century bringing in yarn and weaving products. In the same period, Ravensburg delivered grain to Rorschach, a Swiss town, until 1870, alongside breeding animals and various cheeses, deep within the Swiss Alps. Between 1809 and 1837, there were 375 Swiss people living in Ravensburg, though the Swiss population had dropped to 133 by 1910. In the 1830s, skilled Swiss workers set up a cotton factory with an incorporated bleaching and finishing plant, owned and maintained by the Epf brothers. The Ravensburg horse market, created in around 1840, also attracted many people from Switzerland, especially after the 1847 opening of the railway line from Ravensburg to Friedrichshafen, a town situated on the nearby Lake Constance, on the borderlands of Switzerland and Germany. Rorschach grain traders would make regular visits to the Ravensburger Kornhaus, Ravensburg Corn Exchange, and eventually this cross-border cooperation and trade also led to a branch of the Zurich machine factory, Escher Wyss & Company, opening in the city. This feat was made plausible once a train line connecting the Swiss to the German route network was completed between 1850 and 1853.
So clearly, Baron Pirbright, or Lord Pirbright as he was in earlier days, was their guiding light for the development of this reorganization of the British Empire around imperialist corporatism. And this explains how that British South Africa Company gained so much power in South Africa. And then we see, as Rhodes is getting older and sick, Lord Milner and John Buchan come in, and they press by the way, Pirbright promoted both Boer Wars. And in the Second Boer War, they set up a concentration camp. And as timing would have it, Douglas, we've just gotten a slew of documents from South Africa documenting the death of children in these war concentration camps, and they describe hideous treatment of these children and symptoms, which we're still getting medical people to tell us what these symptoms are.
The factory was set up by Walter Zuppinger between 1856 and 1859 and would begin production in 1860. In 1861, we can see the first official patent of the manufacturer's Escher Wyss in Ravensburg of, quote, peculiar facilities on mechanical looms for ribbon weaving, end quote. At this time, the Ravensburg branch of Escher Wyss would be directed by Walter Zuppinger, and would be where he developed his tangential turbine, and where he gained a number of additional patents. In 1870, Zuppinger, along with others, also founded a paper mill works in Bayernfurt, close to Ravensburg. He retired in 1875 and devoted all his energies to the further advance of turbines. At the turn of the 20th century, Escher Wyss had put the ribbon weaving to one side and had begun to concentrate on much bigger projects, like the production of large industrial turbines. And in 1907, they sought an approval and concession procedure for the construction of a hydropower plant near Dorgern am Rhein, which was reported in a Basel brochure from 1925. By 1920, Escher Wyss found themselves embroiled in serious financial difficulties. The Treaty of Versailles had restricted the military and economic growth of Germany following the Great War, and the Swiss company found the downturn in neighbouring national civil engineering projects too much to bear. The parent branch of Escher Wyss was located in Zurich and dated back to 1805, and the company, which still benefited from a good reputation and a history lasting more than a century, was deemed too important to lose. In December 1920, a reorganisation was carried out by writing down the share capital from 11.5 to 4.015 million French francs, which was later increased again to 5.515 million Swiss francs. By the end of the financial year of 1931, Escher Wyss was still losing money. Yet the plucky company continued to deliver large-scale civil engineering contracts throughout the 1920s. As noted in the official correspondence written in 1924 from Wilhelm III, Prince of Urach, to the company Escher Wyss, and to the asset manager of the House of Urach.
But they clearly believed they were being experimented with at the time, and these would have been those Wellcome medicine chests. So Henry Wellcome and the whole idea of using vaccines as a bioweapon goes way back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, and Henry Wellcome. And isn't it interesting that his trust would be the largest trust, second largest trust in the world today, giving grants out to researchers to further refine this strategy. Now, I'm just going to stop there for a minute because there's some other angles here.
Accountant Julius Heller. This document discusses the general terms and conditions of the Association of German Water Turbine Manufacturers for the delivery of machines and other equipment for hydropower plants. This is also confirmed in a brochure on the Conditions of the Association of German Water Turbine Manufacturers for the installation of turbines and machine parts within the German Reich, printed on March the 20th, 1923, in an advertising brochure from Escher Wyss for a universal oil pressure regulator. After the Great Depression in the early 1930s had laid waste to the global economy, Escher Wyss announced, quote, "As the catastrophic development of the economic situation in connection with the currency declines, the company is temporarily unable to continue its current liabilities in various customer countries." End quote. The company also revealed that it would apply for a court deferral to the Swiss newspaper Neue Zürcher Nachrichten, which reported on the 1st of December 1931 that, quote, "The company Escher Wyss has been granted a stay of bankruptcy until the end of March 1932, and, acting as curator in Switzerland, a trust company has been appointed." End quote. The article stated optimistically that there should be a prospect of continuing operations. In 1931, Escher Wyss employed around 1,300 non-contracted workers and 550 salaried employees. By the mid-1930s, Escher Wyss had again found itself in financial trouble. In order to rescue the company this time, a consortium was brought on board to save the ailing engineering firm. The consortium was partly formed by the Federal Bank of Switzerland, which was coincidentally headed by a Max Schwab, of no relation to Klaus Schwab. And further restructuring took place. In 1938, it was announced that an engineer at the firm, Colonel Jakob Schmidheiny, would become the new president of the board of directors at Escher Wyss. Soon after the outbreak of war in 1939, Schmidheiny was quoted as saying, "The outbreak of war does not necessarily mean unemployment for the machine industry in a neutral country. On the contrary." End quote. Escher Wyss and its new management were apparently looking forward to profiting off the war, paving the way for their transformation into a major Nazi military contractor.
Oh, I don't know why you're stopping, because this is so good. It's riveting to hear this, and I'll just underscore a few things you were saying. Basically, you are describing the weaponization of corporate big pharmaceutical.
Yes.
And
no question at all.
Yeah, it's like shocking that they are so blatant about it, and that they will say, "Oh no, we have patents." They brag about their patents. You can find this on their website. When you read these things, you can hardly believe them. And now, myself, I keep being embarrassed again and again to say that I actually have a degree in history, and I did not know that the Viennese Habsburg court Jew, Solomon de Worms, was given Ceylon as just an experimental place to show us how far he could fleece basically an entire island, or one could even say a nation. So these were the archetypal corporatizations of what we had seen with the British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, the German Hanseatic League, and then what you just described as the South Africa
British South Africa
Corporation, which we know we had ran across them when we were looking at Cecil Rhodes and then Milner and the Transvaal, and the way that they were ripping off the gold and the diamonds and being supported monetarily by Rothschilds and being given fake propaganda, because remember, this is also directly connected to fake propaganda because the kinetics is connected to BBC.
When Adolf Hitler came to power, many things changed in Germany. And the story of the Jewish population of Ravensburg during that era is a sad one to tell. Yet it was hardly the first time that anti-Semitism had been recorded as having reared its ugly head in the region. In the Middle Ages, a synagogue mentioned as far back as 1345 was located at the centre of Ravensburg, serving a small Jewish community which can be traced from 1330 to 1429. At the end of 1429 and through 1430, the Jews of Ravensburg were targeted and a horrific massacre ensued. In the nearby settlements of Lindau, Überlingen, Buchhorn, later renamed Friedrichshafen, Meersburg and Konstanz, there were mass arrests of Jewish residents. The Jews of Lindau were burnt alive during the 1429 to 1430 Ravensburg blood libel, in which members of the Jewish community were accused of ritually sacrificing babies. In August 1430, in Überlingen, the Jewish community was forced to convert. 11 of them did so, and the 12 who refused were killed. The massacres which took place in Lindau, Überlingen and Ravensburg happened with the direct approval of the ruling King Sigmund, and any remaining Jews were soon expelled from the region. Ravensburg had this ban confirmed by Emperor Ferdinand I in 1559, and it was upheld, for example, in an 1804 instruction issued for the city guard, which read, "Since the Jews are not allowed to engage in any trade or business here, no one else is allowed to enter the city by post or by carriage. The rest, however, if they have not received a permit for a longer or shorter stay from the police office, are to be removed from the city by the police station."
And they basically control the airwaves. In a minute, I'm going to make a crazy speculation for anybody, which you'll have to be very much a follower of us to understand this. But once I say this and you think about it, I would like to see if anybody can say that it isn't true. But anyway, let's go back.
Well, let me add another layer here, because it's really important. In the 1880s was the period of time when Nikola Tesla was filing all of his many patents for his inventions for wireless, for electric light, for electric motor, for wireless telegraphs. And we counted up during the tenure of Lord Pirbright as the Minister of Trade and the colonies, Tesla had filed 56 patents. And we already knew from previous research that this was exactly the same time that the British Post Office and Admiralty were setting up Marconi as a cutout, as a front man for a Marconi wireless company that the British were going to have a monopoly on. And they were going to give a monopoly contract to the Post Office and to the Admiralty, which would be rock solid. Now, how do we know this? Well, there's a lot of evidence for it now, and there's a lot of discussion in Parliament about these contracts. They entered them in secret in the 1880s during de Worms's tenure, and we also know that they very much saw that the telegraphy business allowed them to better unify their communications throughout the empire.
Not until the 19th century were Jews able to settle legally in Ravensburg again, and even by then, their number remained so small that a synagogue was not rebuilt. In 1858, there were only 3 Jews recorded in Ravensburg, and in 1895 this number peaked at 57. From the turn of the century until 1933, the numbers of Jews living in Ravensburg had steadily decreased until the community was only made up of 23 people. By the start of the 1930s, there were 7 main Jewish families living in Ravensburg: the Adler, Erlanger, Harburger, Hermann, Landauer, Rose and Sondermann families. After the National Socialists seized power, some of the Ravensburg Jews were initially forced to emigrate, while others would later be murdered in Nazi concentration camps. In the lead-up to World War II, there were many public displays of hatred towards the small community of Jews in and around Ravensburg. As early as March the 13th, 1933, about 3 weeks before the nationwide Nazi boycott of all Jewish shops in Germany, Sturmabteilung guards posted themselves in front of 2 of the 5 Jewish shops in Ravensburg and tried to prevent potential buyers from entering, putting up signs on one shop stating "Wohlwert closed until Aryanization." Wohlwerts would soon become Aryanized and would be the only Jewish-owned shop to survive the Nazi pogrom.
And that as wireless came on, these guys were not stupid. They saw that they wanted to have a monopoly on wireless technology throughout the world, and that's what they worked to achieve. And so when they took Marconi public in a Marconi wireless public in about don't quote me on this, 1910, 1911, 1912, David Lloyd George, the future prime minister, had conducted insider trading and had gone and bought stock in American wireless, Marconi wireless, and got caught. And they actually call it the Marconi scandal, stock scandal. So the intent of these people to have full control over wireless technology, propaganda, the mining and gold rights of the colonies, in this case, South Africa, West Africa, and the Congo, by the way. We also know that Stanley also assisted Leopold II in Belgium to seize control of all the mines in the Congo during the same period. So these guys were on a tear. They were going to organize the British Empire the way they wanted it, and the king was going to go along with it, the queen, then the king. And so there is this odd juxtaposition of pharmaceuticals and wireless technology.
The other owners of the 4 large Jewish department stores in Ravensburg, Knopf, Merkur, Landauer and Wallersteiner, were all forced to sell their properties to non-Jewish merchants between 1935 and 1938. During this period, many of the Ravensburg Jews were able to flee abroad before the worst of the National Socialist persecution began. While at least 8 died violently, it was reported that 3 Jewish citizens who lived in Ravensburg survived because of their Aryan spouses. Some of the Jews who were arrested in Ravensburg during Kristallnacht were forced to march through the streets of Baden-Baden under SS Guard supervision the following day, and were later deported to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Horrific Nazi crimes against humanity took place in Ravensburg. On the 1st of January 1934, the Law for the Prevention of Hereditary Diseases came into force in Nazi Germany, meaning people with diagnosed illnesses such as dementia, schizophrenia, epilepsy, hereditary deafness, and various mental disorders could be legally forcibly sterilized.
And you said it, it's about propaganda. Well, if you're going to conduct warfare, it is essential that you control the airwaves, that you control the propaganda, because you might not even have the goods relative to the biopathogen to actually kill an entire population. So what you need to do then is instill fear in them that they might all die, so that you can achieve your objectives through fear. And I think that is why they have been so hell-bent to completely control propaganda as they've moved through the 20th century and now into the 21st century.
In the Ravensburg City Hospital, today called Heilig Geist Hospital, forced sterilizations were carried out, beginning in April 1934. By 1936, sterilization was the most performed medical procedure in the municipal hospital. In the pre-war years of the 1930s, leading up to the German annexation of Poland, Ravensburg's Escher Wyss factory, now managed directly by Klaus Schwab's father Eugen Schwab, continued to be the biggest employer in Ravensburg. Not only was the factory a major employer in the town, but Hitler's own Nazi party awarded the Escher Wyss Ravensburg branch the title of National Socialist Model Company, while Eugen Schwab was at the helm. The Nazis were potentially wooing the Swiss company for cooperation in the coming war, and their advances were eventually reciprocated. Ravensburg was an anomaly in wartime Germany, as it was never targeted by any Allied airstrikes. The presence of the Red Cross and a rumoured agreement with various companies, including Escher Wyss, saw the Allied forces publicly agree not to target the southern German town.
Because they could achieve through propaganda what they didn't achieve through their science.
So true, so true. And we know that some of the people who are controlling members of Kinetic are connected directly to the BBC, to news outlets, to newspapers. And if you go back, it's not a myth, it is not a conspiracy, that the Rothschilds, from the second year that Reuters existed, was the money behind them, but they were the secret money behind them because they were Jews. So I'm sorry to have to put this in a horrible perspective, but let's do so.
It was not classified as a significant military target throughout the war, and for that reason the town still maintains many of its original features. However, much darker things were afoot in Ravensburg once the war began. Eugen Schwab continued to manage the National Socialist Model Company, Escher Wyss, and the Swiss company would aid the Nazi Wehrmacht in producing significant weapons of war, as well as more basic armaments. The Escher Wyss company was a leader in large turbine technology for hydroelectric dams and power plants, but they also manufactured parts for German fighter planes. They were also intimately involved in much more sinister projects happening behind the scenes, which, if completed, could have changed the outcome of World War II. Western military intelligence was already aware of Escher Wyss's complicity and collaboration with the Nazis. There are records available from Western military intelligence at the time, specifically Record Group 226, from the data compiled by the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the US precursor to the CIA, which shows that Allied forces were aware of some of Escher Wyss's business dealings with the Nazis.
The Habsburgs gave Solomon de Worms a title because he was the Viennese court Jew. A long time ago, it was that the Christian kings and queens, the monarchy, couldn't actually involve themselves in usury, and so they used Jews to do their banking. Well, when I hear that we're talking about trusts, we're talking about the Wellcome Trust, we're talking about the Gates Trust, we're talking about all these trusts. They're all charities. In other words, they're all tax-free, but then they own companies that own stolen patents for everything that has been digitized, every satellite, every radio frequency, every type of spying imaginable is going on at the sites that you have uncovered. And we know that they have the propaganda behind them because Associated Press is nothing more than an extension of Reuters in America. We can trace through the Empire Press Union the fact that when they started the Empire Press Union, it was almost a system. It was almost institutionalized. Well, who started it? Who institutionalized this? It was the Rothschilds. They got the money from the Transvaal, but they also got money from the Congo, everywhere that they were fleecing. They were fleecing every nation that they could because they thought that they were more powerful than a nation, and that's what we are pointing at here. And here comes my big speculation.
Within Record Group 226, there are 3 specific mentions of Escher Wyss. File number 47178, which reads, Escher Wyss of Switzerland is working on a large order for Germany Flamethrowers are dispatched from Switzerland under the name Brennstoffbehälter, dated September 1944. Brennstoffbehälter means fuel containers. File number 41589 showed that the Swiss were allowing German exports to be stored in their country, a supposedly neutral nation during World War II. The entry reads, Business relations between Empresa Nacional Calvo-Sotelo, Encaso, Escher Wyss and Mineralzellbaugesellschaft. 1 page, July 1944. The archive notes see also L42627, report on collaboration between the Spanish Empresa Nacional Calvo-Sotelo and the German Rheinmetall Borsig on German exports stored in Switzerland. 1 page, August 1944. And thirdly, file number 72654 claimed that Hungary's bauxite was formerly sent to Germany and Switzerland for refining. Then, a government syndicate built an aluminium plant at Dunaújmás on the borders of Hungary. Electric power was provided, Hungary contributed coal mines, and equipment was ordered from the Swiss firm Escher Wyss. Production began in 1941. 2 pages, May 1944.
Now you can throw this out the window if you want, but well, first let me say, Henry de Worms, okay, well, he's Jewish, but they gave him land. Oh, but that land is given back and forth to weird companies that are part of trusts and charities, or the military, or the Queen, or whatever. So is Henry de Worms simply the front man for what we see here as the worst form of corporate intelligence that wishes to do what you said, have an imperialistic, globalistic, fascist corporatism, and that's what I think we're looking at. So here's what I'm going to speculate.
Well, when you say front man, I think he's more than a front man. Marconi's a front man for Marconi Wire.
No, you're right. He's the money bag. Sorry.
But Henry de Worms is the Rothschilds that we're talking about. See, that's the thing I think that has been always confusing and puzzling about the involvement of the Rothschilds in various sovereign governments, in that, you know, it's so easy to devolve into conspiracy theory that they're sitting there in the back room devising everything. But in the case of Henry de Worms, he was very out front. He was very public. He was a public minister. He was the first Jewish cabinet minister in the British Empire, first. And it's well known. It was well written about. It wasn't hidden. He was I forget the name of the Jewish Association of Synagogues in London, but he was the president. And so everyone in the empire knew that he was Jewish and didn't seem to have a problem with it. There's a lot of discussion about it. It was interesting when one of his daughters wanted to get married to a Christian man. Henry went to the wedding and gave away his daughter in a Christian church service, and that really bothered the Jewish community in London, and to the point where by the end of his life he was estranged from the Jewish community.
Yet Escher Wyss were leaders in one blossoming field in particular, the creation of new turbine technology. The company had engineered a 14,500 horsepower turbine for the Norsk Hydro Industrial Facility's strategically important hydroelectric plant at Vemork near Rjukan in Norway. The Norsk Hydro plant, part powered by Escher Wyss, was the only industrial plant under Nazi control capable of producing heavy water, an essential ingredient for making plutonium for the Nazi atomic bomb program. The Germans had put all possible resources behind the production of heavy water, but the Allied forces were aware of the potentially game-changing technological advances by the increasingly desperate Nazis. During 1942 and 1943, the hydro plant was the target of partially successful British commando and Norwegian resistance raids, although heavy water production continued. The Allied forces would drop more than 400 bombs on the plant, which barely affected the operations at the sprawling facility. In 1944, German ships attempted to transport heavy water back to Germany, but the Norwegian resistance was able to sink the ship carrying the payload. With help from Escher Wyss, the Nazis were almost able to change the tides of war and bring about an Axis victory.
Completely. But that aside, the power that these guys were wielding was all based on the fact that they were using the British Privy Council and the King and Queen to cover all of their activities throughout the world. And so they were sitting there behind the Privy Council, setting up corporations that could do, excuse the colloquial expression, could do whatever the hell they wanted anywhere in the world, and they would get away with it, and they knew it.
Oh, you're
That's
absolutely
what we got
right.
here.
Matter of fact, you pointed out that one of the members on the board, one of the big controlling people, is directly linked to the Bank of England. And remember that the Queen's advisor, the one and only advisor in England, because of the monarchy, you cannot question the Queen's business. So if the Queen owns 20% of Kinetic, you can't talk about Kinetic. You can never do anything with Kinetic.
Let's talk about Kinetic. How did Kinetic come into the picture? And how did it come into the picture from studying the Pirbright Institute? I think that's a good question. And very briefly, the property that the Pirbright Institute sits on and this satellite system also sits on is called the Cobit Hill Earth Station. And the property of the Cobit Hill Station in parliamentary records was controlled by this Kinetic company that was set up in November of 2001. And that was a consolidation of all the British experimental stations and research stations throughout the country, was all combined through a British knight, who we don't need to talk about now, but we've done some background checking on him. Anyway, he was tasked with consolidating all this R&D into one place. Now, that's always a danger in a government, isn't it?
Back in the Escher Wyss factory in Ravensburg, Eugen Schwab had been busy putting forced labourers to work at his model Nazi company. During the years of World War II, nearly 3,600 forced labourers worked in Ravensburg, including at Escher Wyss. According to the city archivist of Ravensburg, Andreas Schmuder, the Escher Wyss machine factory in Ravensburg employed between 198 and 203 civil workers and prisoners of war during the war. Karl Schweitzer, a local Lindau historian, states that Escher Wyss maintained a small special camp for forced labourers on the factory premises. The use of masses of forced labourers in Ravensburg made it necessary to set up one of the largest recorded Nazi forced labour camps in the workshop of a former carpenter's at Ziegelstrasse 16. At one time, the camp in question accommodated 125 French prisoners of war, who were later redistributed to other camps in 1942. The French workers were replaced by 150 Soviet prisoners of war, who, it was rumoured, were treated the worst out of all the prisoners of war. One such prisoner was Zina Yakusheva, whose work card and workbook are held by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. These documents identify her as a non-Jewish forced labourer assigned to Ravensburg, Germany during 1943 and 1944. Eugen Schwab would dutifully maintain the status quo during the war years. After all, with young Klaus Martin Schwab having been born in 1938, and his brother Urs Rainer Schwab born a few years later, Eugen would have wanted to keep his children out of harm's way.
But then they took about 75% of that activity and, quote, privatized it through this Kinetic company. And as we know from military guys, Kinetic means you're going hot. You're starting to shoot people at that point. So that's a curious name they chose for Kinetic. And so that company began with this sweetheart deal with the Crown. And remarkably, in the Companies House documents on the formation of Kinetic, they do not hide. They actually say that the Crown holds a special share which gives her complete control over this Kinetic company from the get-go. And that's the most clear description of the Queen's golden share that we've ever seen. And so they weren't hiding the fact that the Queen controls this company. And going forward, then they started getting all of these funding facilities. So they started out with over $750 million of funding from 3 banks, which they don't identify. But from some of the records, they kind of let slip. It's probably JP Morgan, the Bank of England, and what was the other one? Investec out of South Africa, which is Lord Mark Malloch Brown. And then they move forward. They start acquiring all these sweetheart contracts with the British Ministry of Defense. And then very quickly, they start getting American business. Now, here we have a British-owned and controlled company getting defense contracts in the United States. And I'm going to bottom line this. To this day, Kinetic has received over $8 billion in U.S. military defense, space wars, emergency systems contracts in the United States.
Born on the 30th of March 1938 in Ravensburg, Germany, Klaus Schwab was the eldest child in a normal nuclear family. Between 1945 and 1947, Klaus attended primary school in Au, Germany. Klaus Schwab recalls in a 2006 interview with the Irish Times that after the war, I chaired the Franco-German Regional Youth Association. My heroes were Adenauer, De Gasperi and de Gaulle. Klaus Schwab and his younger brother Urs Rainer Schwab were both to follow in the footsteps of their grandfather Gottfried and their father Eugen, and would both initially train as machine engineers. Klaus's father had told the young Schwab that if he wanted to make an impact on the world, then he should train as a machine engineer. This would only be the beginning of Schwab's university credentials. Klaus began studying his plethora of degrees at Spohn Gymnasium, Ravensburg, between 1949 and 1957, eventually graduating from the Humanistisches Gymnasium in Ravensburg. Between 1958 and 1962, Klaus began working with various engineering companies, and in 1962, Klaus completed his mechanical engineering studies at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, in Zurich, with an engineering diploma. The following year, he also completed an economics course at the University of Fribourg, Switzerland. From 1963 until 1966, Klaus worked as an assistant to the Director General of the German Machine Building Association, VDMA, in Frankfurt. In 1965, Klaus was also working on his doctorate from the ETH Zurich, writing his dissertation on the longer-term export credit as a business problem in mechanical engineering. Then, in 1966, he received his doctorate in engineering from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, Zurich. By this time, Klaus's father, Eugen Schwab, was swimming in bigger circles than he had previously swum in. After being a well-known personality in Ravensburg, and as the managing director of the Escher Wyss factory from before the war, Eugen would eventually be elected as president of the Ravensburg Chamber of Commerce. In 1966, during the founding of the German Committee for Splügen Railway Tunnel, Eugen Schwab defined the founding of the German Committee as a project that creates a better and faster connection for large circles in our increasingly converging Europe, and thus offers new opportunities for cultural, economic and social development.
Another company that was formed at the very same time in the United States was Serco Inc. And Serco is also a Crown golden share controlled company that has had over $9 billion worth of government contracts in the US. And both of those companies are heavily invested in controlling most of our critical infrastructure for defense and intelligence in the United States, in addition to the fact that they do the same in the United Kingdom, which would also mean the Commonwealth. So here we've got two Queen-controlled companies running military and intelligence for the entire planet. That's a bottom line. This is just outrageous.
Well, add that to previous research that was done that the Lockheed Martin's L3, the largest corporate intelligence group in the world and in America, is also owned by the Queen through the golden shares. Now, when we're talking about this, let's remember that Kinetic also includes DERA. DERA is the British DARPA.
Yes.
And that's, in America, that's the Defense Agency Research Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. Got to think about that one. And we all know that that's where the evil of weaponization comes. Anything that could be weaponized is planned through DARPA. Well, guess what? DARPA is directly giving all that information to DERA, which is the British version of it. So when we say kinetic, we're not just talking, we're talking about the weirdest conglomeration of powerful forces that I've ever seen, ever, period. We're talking about with the banks, we're talking about propaganda, we're talking about the press, we're talking about satellites, we're talking about intelligence, counterintelligence, we're talking about spying, we're talking about big pharma, we're talking about control of everything.
In 1967, Klaus Schwab gained a doctorate in economics from the University of Fribourg, Switzerland, as well as a master in public administration from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. While at Harvard, Schwab was taught by Henry Kissinger, who he would later say was among the top 3 or 4 figures who had most influenced his thinking over the course of his entire life. In the previously mentioned Irish Times article of 2006, Klaus Schwab talks about that period as being very important to the formation of his present ideological thinking, stating, "Years later, when I came back from the United States after my studies at Harvard, there were 2 events that had a decisive triggering effect on me. The first was a book by Jean-Jacques Servan-Schreiber, The American Challenge, which said Europe would lose out against the United States because of Europe's inferior management methods. The other event was, and this is relevant to Ireland, the Europe of 6 became the Europe of the 9. These 2 events would help shape Klaus Schwab into a man who wanted to change the way people went about their business. That same year, Klaus's younger brother, Urs Rainer Schwab, graduated from ETH Zurich as a mechanical engineer, and Klaus Schwab went to work for his father's old company, Escher Wyss, soon to become Sulzer Escher Wyss Aktiengesellschaft Zurich, as assistant to the chairman to aid in the reorganization of the merging companies. This leads us towards Klaus's nuclear connections. The rise of a technocrat.
And what do they have? Hegemony. Complete control is what's on their mind. Now, I'm going to go back and I'm going to say something crazy, but here it is. I believe that what you discovered with Kinetic, if you actually at even one of their sites, but the Cobalt Hill site is a perfect example. The Cobalt Hill site is very much like what we have in America with the National Security Agency called Fort Meade, Maryland. There's only a very small building, but then thousands of cars come and park there. Why? Because it's all underground. I believe that Cobalt Hill, there's, by looking at the antenna arrays and looking at the way it's laid out, that there's a great deal of stuff underground, and that they're doing just about every type of research imaginable as well as military intervention. So since they are directly connected to the BBC, the Empire Press Union, the Pilgrim Society, the Fabian Society, literally the groups that we have been describing, the Cecil Rhodes Roundtable, Milner's Roundtable, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, all of these groups have their propaganda, don't they? And when we read our newspaper or we go to news, who's the first to report on the most delicate issues here in America? The BBC.
Sulzer, a Swiss company whose origins date back to 1834, had first risen to prominence after starting to build compressors in 1906. By 1914, the family-run firm had become part of 3 joint stock companies, one of which was the official holding company. In the 1930s, Sulzer's profits would suffer during the Great Depression, and, like many businesses at the time, it faced disruption and industrial actions from its workers. World War II may not have affected Switzerland as much as her neighbours, but the economic boom that was to follow led to Sulzer growing in power and market dominance. In 1966, just before the arrival of Klaus Schwab at Escher Wyss, the Swiss turbine manufacturers signed a cooperation agreement with the Sulzer brothers in Winterthur. Sulzer and Escher Wyss would begin to merge in 1966 when Sulzer purchased 53% of the company's shares. Escher Wyss would officially become Sulzer Escher Wyss AG in 1969, when the last of the shares were acquired by the Sulzer brothers. Once the merger had started, Escher Wyss would begin to be restructured, and 2 of the existing board members would be the first to find their service to Escher Wyss coming to an end. Dr. H. Schindler and W. Stoffel would resign from the board of directors, now headed by Georg Sulzer and Alfred Schaffner. Dr. Schindler had been a member of the Escher Wyss board of directors for 28 years, and had worked alongside Eugen Schwab throughout much of his service. Peter Schmidheiny would later take over as chairman of the board of directors of Escher Wyss, continuing the Schmidheiny family rule over the company's executives. During the restructuring process, it was decided that Escher Wyss and Sulzer would concentrate on separate areas of machine engineering, with the Escher Wyss factories primarily working on hydraulic power plant construction, including turbines, storage pumps, reversing machines, closing devices and pipelines, as well as steam turbines, turbo compressors, evaporation systems, centrifuges and machines for the paper and pulp industry, while Sulzer would concentrate on the refrigeration industry, as well as steam boiler construction and gas turbines. On the 1st of January 1968, the freshly reorganised Sulzer Escher Wyss AG was rolled out publicly, and the company had become streamlined, a move deemed necessary because of several large acquisitions. This included a close collaboration with Braun Boveri, a group of Swiss electric engineering companies who had also worked for the Nazis, supplying the Germans with some of their U-boat technology used during World War II. Braun Boveri was also described as defence-related electrical contractors, and would find the conditions of the Cold War arms race to be beneficial to their business.
Somehow the BBC always is ahead of American news. No, here's the reality. There is a group that controls everything that happens in mainstream media that is read, and that's the reason you always hear the same propaganda nonsense at the same time, same exact words. It's called ISIS management. We have pointed out, especially the researchers with Michael McKibben and his researchers, that ISIS is referring to the Thames River, and that ISIS Management is a British company, and they have a group called AVID, and they provide what is read on the prompters for all mainstream media. So AVID ISIS Management is British. But we kept saying, and I have said this since the moment that we discovered this, which was quite some time ago, where is their headquarters, that they are actually writing the news and sending it out via satellite and via Reuters, Thompson, and via the AP. I suggest to you, and it's speculation, that it is in fact kinetic. And I suggest to you that it is in fact Cobit Hill, and that Cobit Hill is a rogue intelligence agency that is corporate, that works directly for the Queen, and it cannot be questioned. As we pointed out, they have members on their board who are literally previously or currently in charge of the Bank of England. So all the money, nobody can question any of the money. For instance, I also believe...
Douglas, we might as well say it here. In 2006, the former CIA director, George Tenet, became a director. And then at the same time, the former deputy chief of staff for the what's that group that advises the president? The
Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Joint Chiefs of Staff became a director, and as far as I know, he's still a director of Kinetic. So here we've got very treasonous relationships going on here.
The merger and reorganization of these Swiss mechanical engineering giants saw their collaboration pay off in unique ways. During the 1968 Winter Olympics in Grenoble, Sulzer and Escherwyss used 8 refrigeration compressors to create tons of artificial ice. In 1969, the two firms combined to help in the building of a new passenger ship named the Hamburg, the first ship in the world to be fully air-conditioned, thanks to the Sulzer-Escherwyss combination. In 1967, Klaus Schwab officially burst onto the scene of the Swiss business community and took a lead in the merger between Sulzer and Escherwyss, as well as forming profitable alliances with Braun Boveri and others. In December 1967, Klaus spoke at a Zurich event to the top Swiss machine engineering organizations, the Employers Association of Swiss Machine and Metal Manufacturers and the Association of Swiss Machine Manufacturers. In his talk, he correctly predicted the importance of incorporating computers into modern Swiss machine engineering, stating that in 1971, products that are not even on the market today are likely to account for up to a quarter of sales. This requires companies to systematically research possible developments and identify gaps in the market. Today, 18 of the 20 largest companies in our machine industry have planning departments that are entrusted with such tasks. Of course, everyone has to make use of the latest technological advances, and the computer is one of them.
Well, you have pointed out it looks like retiring CIA heads go directly to Kinetic.
Right.
It's just disgusting. How can that be that there is a corporate group that makes money but hides under a charity and a trust that is immune of everything, absolute impunity they can act with because the Queen protects them. It's in Britain, and it has all of our top people going to work for them to take everything they knew as their top secret information and
to
share
help
it.
them and to help them ensconce themselves in the United States.
Yes, and
the Admiral Edmund P. Giambastiani Jr. Is the other director with Tenet.
And basically, they know more than we know because they, first off, this is a monopoly sanctioned by the British government, the United Kingdom, protected by the monarchy and the Privy Council, and by an amazing, horrifying, literally, mess of interwoven corporations that when one falls, the next one simply goes on and literally pays no taxes. They never pay taxes. They always devolve to a trust or a charity where no taxes are being paid, but they still make a ton of money before it gets to the charity. I've never seen anything like it. The British have it all worked out. So what I'm going to suggest is Serco, the very corrupt company, one of the worst in the world, that is controlling the United Kingdom and controlling America, all of our data, control of all the movement of everything in America practically, is controlled by Serco contracts. Now, Serco got hit with an $86 billion fine for fraud. It didn't include America, which it would be bigger if it had. What happened? Nothing happened.
The many small and medium-sized companies in our machine industry take the path of cooperation or use the services of special data processing service providers. Computers and data were obviously seen as important to the future, according to Schwab. And this was further projected in the reorganization of Sulzer-Escher-Wyss during their merger. Sulzer's modern website reflects this noteworthy change in direction, stating that, in 1968, material technology activities were intensified by Sulzer and formed the basis for medical technology products. The fundamental change from a machine building company to a technology corporation started to become apparent." End quote. Klaus Schwab was helping to turn Sulzer-Escher-Wyss into something more than just a machine building giant. He was transforming it into a technology corporation driving at high speed into a high-tech future. It should also be noted that Sulzer-Escher-Wyss changed another focus of its business to help it, quote, "form the basis for medical technology products," end quote.
No, I'm not sure about that. How about Carlyle Group? When it was found out that the Carlyle Group had all these no-bid contracts for Iraq, it disappeared.
Can I point out that Carlyle Group was the original funder before the banks came in? They were the original funder of Kinetic.
And that's what I'm pointing out.
And I'll mention one other thing, that Kinetic, in their annual reports, boast that they handle the inventory tracking system for the U.S. Army all over the planet. Now, every time I say that, I just get so infuriated that our people that we put trust in Washington have given the control and they've given the information that's vital to our national security to be handled by a bunch of bozos sitting underground in Cobit Hill, undermining everything that our Army does. That's just, I don't know how to describe how disgusting that is.
An area not previously mentioned as a target industry for Sulzer or Escher-Wyss. But technological advancement wasn't the only upgrade that Klaus Schwab wanted to introduce at Sulzer-Escher-Wyss. He also wanted to change how the company thought about its business managerial style. Schwab and his close associates were pushing an entirely new business philosophy, which would allow all employees to accept the imperatives of motivation to ensure at home a sense of flexibility and maneuverability. It is here, in the late 1960s, that we see Klaus Schwab begin to emerge as a more public figure. At this time, the Sulzer-Escher-Wyss company also became more interested in engaging with the press than ever before. In January 1969, the Swiss giants set up a public advisory session entitled The Press Day of the Machine Industry, which mainly concerned questions on company management. During the event, Schwab would state that companies using authoritarian styles of business management are unable to fully activate the human capital, an argument he would use on many separate occasions.
When I think that we have to ask the Brits where our soldiers are, who's there, and their lives are on the line, and we have to go through the Brits for our patents, for our pharmacy, for our military, for our intelligence, for our satellite connections, for our crypto keys. This is disgusting. What don't the Brits have control of? So I'm suggesting that they literally control our news, and that it comes from one place. And what you will notice is when that news comes, it won't have any byline. There'll be no imprint of who took the photos, who wrote the stories, or anything. But because they come through the channels of the Associated Press or Reuters Thompson or Five Eyes or British intelligence, then it's 100% acceptable. What I'm telling you is this corporate group doesn't tell us what they know, but they control what we know.
They told us in 1909, and they reinforced it in many public documents, that they believe their job is to create public opinion.
During the late 1960s. Plutonium and Pretoria. Escher-Wyss were pioneers in some of the most important technology in power generation. as the US Department of Energy points out in its paper on supercritical carbon dioxide Brayton cycle development, CBC, a device used in hydro and nuclear power plants, quote, Escher Wyss was the first company known to develop the turbo machinery for CBC systems, starting in 1939, end quote. It goes on to state that 24 such systems were built, quote, with Escher Wyss designing the power conversion cycles and building the turbo machinery for all but 3, end quote. By 1966, just before the entrance of Schwab into Escher Wyss and the start of the Sulzer merger, the Escher Wyss helium compressor was designed for the Lafleur Corporation and continued the evolution of the Brayton cycle development. This technology was still of importance to the arms industry by 1986, with nuclear-powered drones being equipped with a helium-cooled Brayton cycle nuclear reactor. Escher Wyss had been involved with manufacturing and installing nuclear technology at least as early as 1962, as shown by a patent for a heat exchange arrangement for a nuclear power plant and a patent from 1966 for a nuclear reactor gas turbine plant with emergency cooling. After Schwab left Sulzer Escher Wyss, Sulzer would also help to develop special turbo compressors for uranium enrichment to yield reactor fuels. When Klaus Schwab joined Sulzer Escher Wyss in 1967 and started the reorganization of the company to be a technology corporation, the involvement of Sulzer Escher Wyss in the darker aspects of the global nuclear arms race became immediately more pronounced. Before Klaus Schwab became involved, Escher Wyss had often concentrated on helping to design and build parts for civilian uses of nuclear technology.
And they haven't not stopped trying to do that.
Well, your research is mind-boggling, but this one is absolutely, it leaves me breathless. I don't have enough breath to express how disturbed I am by the fact that the research that we've been doing now for a couple of years has led to a place where is it just a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that this whole Q phenomena, that there's a company that starts with Q and ends with Q and doesn't have a U after either one of them? I mean, this company says what I always point out. In the National Security Agency, it was filled with a bunch of geeks, right? And we thought it was funny to name things funny things when we were doing weird stuff. So I suggest they named this kinetic because it means going ballistic, it means killing people, and that they could put the Q at the beginning and Q at the end, which I said earlier was the joke. It's the Queens from beginning to end. And it is the Queens from beginning to end, and you can't question it. So if we want to say to anybody, oh, we need to look into whether, say, Kinetic has paid taxes or whether Kinetic is connected to Huawei, okay? Because if Kinetic is connected to Huawei, we can't do any business with them according to the law that Trump has set down. But since they're corporate and they're hidden, we don't really know. But I guarantee you that, yes, of course, the Chinese have already penetrated the British system. That everybody knows that. It's already been demonstrated. And that's the reason Trump can't do business with the Brits. And I said this earlier, there will be no Brexit deal until they solve the Chinese spying issue. Now, if Cobalt Hill is the ultimate spyer on the world and China is spying on them, then China has what they have. Now, this is just absolutely disturbing because China had everything we had in America because they had been invited in. All their microchips, all their capacitors, all their ZTEs, all equipment, all their Huawei equipment, all these sensitive areas in all of our military was filled with Chinese equipment.
Such as nuclear power generation. Yet, with the arrival of the eager Mr. Schwab, also came the company's participation in the illegal proliferation of nuclear weapons technology. By 1969, the incorporation of Escher Wyss into Sulzer was fully completed, and they would be rebranded into Sulzer AG, dropping the historic name Escher Wyss from their name. It was eventually revealed, thanks to a review and report carried out by the Swiss authorities and a man named Peter Hook, that Sulzer-Escher-Wyss began secretly procuring and building key parts for nuclear weapons during the 1960s. The company, while Schwab was on the board, also began playing a critical role in the development of South Africa's illegal nuclear weapons program during the darkest years of the apartheid regime. Klaus Schwab was a leading figure in the founding of a company culture which helped Pretoria build 6 nuclear weapons and partially assemble a 7th.
Trump came in, got rid of it all. Sorry, folks, same thing with Kinetic. We have to disassociate ourselves with that group. And when we do, then we'll find out if their transmissions that are going to the whole world, because they have the best satellite link up I've ever seen, is really producing what I speculate is Avid and ISIS management's propaganda in America.
Oh, by the way, they do hosting services for the U.S. Patent Office. So here we've got Serco running the Patent Office applications, and we've got Kinetic doing hosting services. So you better believe that every patent application, all the data, I'm sure they've just got an open access to the database for all activity of the U.S. Patent Office. And that's consistent with what we've seen that goes all the way back to the 1880s and de Worms. They knew that the future value of the world resource was going to be patents. And so they decided very early to steal them. And they had to do it in such a way and give inventors enough reward so that they would keep inventing, but not too much reward so that they would threaten their power. And so that's what they've done. And they've used the venture capital system in the U.S. and around the world to find the new suckers who will give them their ideas. And eventually they'll buy them out and get them out of the way so that they can weaponize these things for these oligarch companies.
In that report, Peter Hoog outlined how Sulzer-Escher-Wyss AG, referred to post-merger as just Sulzer, had supplied vital components to the South African government and found evidence of Germany's role in supporting the racist regime, also revealing that the Swiss government, quote, was aware of illegal deals but tolerated them in silence while supporting some of them actively or criticising them only half-heartedly, end quote. Hoog's report was eventually finalised in a work entitled Switzerland and South Africa, 1948 to 1994. Final report of the NFP 42+, commissioned by the Swiss Federal Council. Note, the Swiss Federal Council is a 7-person equivalent of the presidency of other countries. This report was compiled and written by Georg Kreis and published in 2007. By 1967, South Africa had constructed a reactor as part of a plan to produce plutonium, the Safari 2, located at Pelindaba. Safari 2 was part of a project to develop a reactor moderated by heavy water, which would be fueled by natural uranium and cooled using sodium. This link to developing heavy water for the creation of uranium, the same technology which had been utilized by the Nazis, also with the help of Escher-Wyss, may explain why the South Africans initially got Escher-Wyss involved. But by 1969, South Africa abandoned the heavy water reactor project at Pelindaba because it was draining resources from their uranium enrichment program that had first begun in 1967. In 1970, Escher-Wyss was definitely deeply involved with nuclear technology, as seen in a record available in the Landesarchiv Baden-Württemberg, or State Archive. The record shows details of a public procurement process and contains information about award talks with specific companies involved in the procurement of nuclear technology and materials.
And, now we see what's going on. We see how they did it, why they did it, and where they're going with it. But let me add a couple more layers to the Pirbright, the Lord Pirbright story, because at his death he had no sons, so he did not pass on his property. And so what we do see is that about a year after he received a 350,000 pound inheritance, which back in the 1880s was an enormous amount of money. He started, that was at the same time that he bankrolled the Stanley exhibition, or the exploration of Stanley on one of his explorations of South Africa. So he was obviously had a lot of money to burn. And the other thing he did is he started buying up all the property around Pirbright. And what we see now in the vicinity of Pirbright is a military installation, and it's actually called the Pirbright Army Training Center. I think that's right, ATC Pirbright. And at that facility, they train British recruits, including their intelligence recruits and their bio-warfare recruits. And literally, these people are close enough to ride their bikes over to the Pirbright Institute. That's how close. So this is an entire military operation housed on the Pirbright property, which we believe and are pretty sure he gave to the Ministry of Defense on or before his death. And because some people said the transfer of property was quite questionable at the time. And that the center for the British Army control of intelligence and biowarfare is right there, including Cobbett Hill and the Pirbright Institute. So whenever you say Cobbett Hill, you might as well say the Pirbright Institute in the same breath, because they're on the same property. And that open field between them is what you're saying, probably the underground facility.
Yes. Well, I want to reiterate something that we haven't mentioned for a while. And that's that when the Rothschilds weaponized banking and it moved into England and literally took over the Bank of England and took over being the administrator of the Queen's business, which means all the entire Bank of England, all the money from the monarchy, basically the entire United Kingdom's money, all has to have the Queen's nod before anybody can do anything. So the Queen acts like she's not in charge, but her last speech to the Parliament, she said "my" over 100 times. My people, my, and by, my. Yes, well, guess what? That is literally true. It is hers, whether you like it or not. So what we're seeing here is when Henry de Worms, whose father, Solomon de Worms, was really the Austrian court Jew, and the Rothschilds, who were Germans, who changed their name, of course, and moved to England, and then they became the court Jews of England. Well, de Worms came over and kind of got into this institutionalized system of weaponized banking. And who was it that taught them that? That was Giuseppe Mazzini, who we've done entire long reports on how the corrupt bankers of Venice moved up into Europe, finally into Germany and into Holland, and then they moved to England, and they controlled all of the banks of Europe. And who were they? It's not a myth. The 5 Rothschild brothers, and now we know also Rothschild's relatives like de Worms, Henry de Worms, Lord Pirbright. These people were weaponizing banking at the time. Now, banking, we got to see what happened with the banking for the Transvaal or for South Africa, or they saw the way the Austrians did it in Ceylon, or the way the British East India Company did it through the whole world, everywhere they could rip off. That's what they did. But it all came back to banking. So when we're looking at this, what exploded my brain the worst was to find out there was a branch of the Rothschilds, the de Worms, the Pirbright, Lord Pirbright, that literally were openly doing these things and saying, we're just simply going to take control of not even industries like gold and diamond, which they took absolute control of that. But they, remember, the Rothschilds set the LIBOR rate, they set the rate for gold and silver for, I don't even know how long, for so long.
The companies cited include Newcomb, Uhde, Krantz, Preussag, Escher Wyss, Siemens, Rheintal, Leibold, Lurgi, and the infamous Transnuclear. The Swiss and South Africans had a close relationship through this period of history, when it was hardly easy for the brutal South African regime to find close allies. By the 4th of November 1977, the United Nations Security Council had enacted Resolution 418, which imposed a mandatory arms embargo against South Africa, an embargo that wouldn't be fully lifted until 1994. Georg Kreis pointed out the following in his detailed assessment of the Hoog report. Quote, "The fact that the authorities assumed a laissez-faire attitude even after May 1978 comes to the fore in an exchange of letters between the anti-apartheid movement and the Swiss Federal Department of Military Affairs, DFMA, in October to December 1978. As the study by Hoog explains, the anti-apartheid movement of Switzerland pointed to German reports, according to which Sulzer Escher Wyss and a company called BBC had supplied parts for the South African uranium enrichment plant, and had repeated credits to Eskom, the South African public utility, which also included considerable contributions by Swiss banks. These assertions led to questions of whether the Swiss Federal Council, in light of fundamental support of the UN embargo, ought not to instigate the Swiss National Bank to stop authorizing credits for Eskom in the future." End quote. Swiss banks would help to fund the South African race to nukes, and by 1986, Sulzer Escher Wyss were successfully producing special compressors for uranium enrichment. The founding of the World Economic Forum. In 1970, the young upstart Klaus Schwab wrote to the European Commission and asked for help in setting up a non-commercial think tank for European business leaders. The European Commission sponsored the event as well, sending French politician Raymond Barre to act as the forum's intellectual mentor. Raymond Barre, who was at that time the European Commissioner for Economic and Financial Affairs, would later go on to be French Prime Minister, and would be accused of making anti-Semitic comments while in office. So, in 1970, Schwab left Escher Wyss to organise a 2-week business managerial conference.
I can't remember, only in the last few years did they not do it. So the Rothschilds literally controlled what the value and the price of silver and gold were on any one day for the whole world. And that's the reason Reuters Thompson was never a news agency that was part of the Fourth Estate. It was always a banking manipulative propaganda tool. So to hear now how the Henry de Worms basically said, okay, let's take that now to the whole world, and not just through the Empire Press, through newspapers and through wireless. Let's take it through satellite, through everything digitized, through the internet, through news, through everything that is given out in the news, everything that is programmed on the television. And that's what it looks like this was. Another Rothschild takeover of a section of the control, the hegemony of the whole world through the most vile and disgusting methodologies that we have actually run across, literally depopulation.
In 1971, the first meeting of the World Economic Forum, then called the European Management Symposium, convened in Davos, Switzerland. Around 450 participants from 31 countries would take part in Schwab's first European Management Symposium, mostly made up of managers from various European companies, politicians, and US academics. The project was recorded as being organized by Klaus Schwab and his secretary Hilde Stoll, who the same year would become Klaus Schwab's wife. Klaus Schwab's European Symposium was not an original idea. As writer Ganga J. Aratnam stated quite coherently in 2018, quote, Klaus Schwab's spirit of Davos was also the spirit of Harvard. Not only had the business school advocated the idea of a symposium, prominent Harvard economist, John Kenneth Galbraith, championed the affluent society, as well as capitalism's planning needs and the rapprochement of East and West. End quote. It was also true that, as Aratnam pointed out, this was not the first time Davos had hosted such events.
Through vaccination and experimental inoculation, using money from the Wellcome Trust Company, for God's sake. That's absurd that the people who made money killing people with drugs don't have to pay taxes as they then do new experimentations on new drugs that kill people.
And they got laws written in the U.S. where they can't be held liable.
But in England, they can get away with it because it's the Queen's business and you can't ask about it. So you have done it again. And I don't know what to do except to say that we now have found what was the imaginary queue.
Between 1928 and 1931, the Davos University Conferences took place at the Hotel Belvedere. Events which were co-founded by Albert Einstein and were only halted by the Great Depression and the threat of looming war. The most influential group that spurred the creation of Klaus Schwab's symposium was the Club of Rome, an influential think tank of the scientific and moneyed elite that mirrors the World Economic Forum in many ways, including in its promotion of a global governance model led by a technocratic elite.
You know, this is the real cue. This is the real source of what is happening now, today. These are the people using the Forensic Laboratory Institute's research to scrub the net, to scrub the news. These are the same people. And those are the programs. And where do they always come out of? In every case, Britain.
The club had been founded in 1968 by Italian industrialist Aurelio Peccei and Scottish chemist Alexander King during a private meeting at a residence owned by the Rockefeller family in Bellagio, Italy. Among its first accomplishments was a 1972 book entitled The Limits to Growth, that largely focused on global overpopulation, warning that, quote, if the world's consumption patterns and population growth continued at the same high rates of the time, the Earth would strike its limits within a century.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they saw a good deal with the deal they cut with the British monarch, and they've doubled down ever since and passed that same power on to their children and now their grandchildren. And what is encouraging about their grandchildren is they don't seem to be as committed to the vision as their predecessors, and they don't seem to be as smart either. I mean, these guys were ruthless and they were smart. And one of our folks is putting together a montage of the pictures of these people. So we put names and faces to names. And what you will see in their countenances is an incredible arrogance that, they knew they could not be touched.
End quote. At the third meeting of the World Economic Forum in 1973, Peccei delivered a speech summarizing the book, which the World Economic Forum website remembers as having been the distinguishing event of this historical meeting. That same year, the Club of Rome would publish a report detailing an adaptive model for global governance that would divide the world into 10 interconnected economic political regions. The Club of Rome was long controversial for its obsession with reducing the global population.
And they had the protection of the Queen and the British Navy, the British Army behind them the entire time. And so they pushed then 2 world wars to get what they wanted. And then they pushed additional propaganda, false flags to this very day. And of course, we haven't talked about the Federal Reserve in this, but this occurred within 20 years of the people we're talking about. And so after they were unsuccessful at getting their League of Nations pushed through, which we now see the actual records in the War Cabinet in let's see, what date was that? 2000 or 1917. Charles Masterman and John Buchan were pushing the idea of the League of Nations in the War Cabinet at that time.
And many of its earlier policies, which critics described as influenced by eugenics and neo-Malthusian. However, in the club's infamous 1991 book, The First Global Revolution, it was argued that such policies could gain popular support if the masses were able to link them with an existential fight against a common enemy. To that effect, the book The First Global Revolution contains a passage entitled "The Common Enemy of Humanity is Man."
And then we see that they said, well, we've got to carry forward with this effort that Cecil Rhodes has encouraged us to do to get America back into the fold. So they roped in Andrew Carnegie, who started working on the educational system in our country and the library system to make it more pro-British. And then they got their bankers to start working on how they could set up a Federal Reserve System and actually give up the sovereignty of American currency to these internationalists.
Which states the following, quote, "In searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat, which must be confronted by everyone together. But in designating these dangers as the enemy, we fall into the trap, which we have already warned readers about, namely mistaking symptoms for causes."
And stupidly, we did it. And hopefully that's going to be undone. It seems you're right, the money. If Serco and Kinetic went away and the Federal Reserve went away, that would cause massive changes in what we see going on, I believe.
Well, you nailed it. The same weaponized bankers who were taking over the world took over America in 1913 through the U.S. Federal Reserve, and that's history. Very clear. We've gone over it many times. So the other thing is, as you pointed out, the institutionalized corporate dynasties, they get so lazy, their children get so lazy that, they go out and they brag about what they do.
Right.
They put it on their websites. It's like, hi, we're eugenicists.
All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes. And it is only through changed attitudes and behaviour that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. End quote. In the years since, the elite that populate the Club of Rome and the World Economic Forum have frequently argued that population control methods are essential to protecting the environment.
And we believe that depopulation is the number one issue. What did I just read? That's who these.
Let me read you a press release. When Cobalt Hill Earth Station was ostensibly sold to a German corporation called CETEL, and the head of CEO of CETEL, Guido Newman, I kid you not, that's his name, Guido. He said in his description of Cobalt Hill, he said, Cobalt Hill is located only 25 miles from central London in the UK and occupies a 7-acre secure compound on 200 acres of land. So that confirms all of our research from the Parliament records. Currently, it houses more than 25 antennas with active operations on 13 satellites, plus spare capacity, enabling quick turnaround times on even short notice customer requirements. Due to the location's historical use by the British Ministry of Defence, it has blanket planning permission for unlimited antenna installations within the 200 acres and operate within an RF exclusion zone, preventing any local interference.
It is thus unsurprising that the World Economic Forum would similarly use the issues of climate and environment as a way to market otherwise unpopular policies, such as those of the Great Reset, as necessary. Since the founding of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab has become one of the most powerful people in the world, and his Great Reset has made it more important than ever to scrutinise the man sitting on the globalist throne. Given his prominent role in the far-reaching effort to transform every aspect of the existing order, Klaus Schwab's history was difficult to research. When you start to dig into the history of a man like Schwab, who sits aloft other shadowy elite movers and shakers, you soon find lots of information has been hidden or removed.
Now, Douglas, you were in the NSA, you know about this stuff. What is he telling us there?
He's telling us very clearly, and you can read it right on the website, that they use what's called in-band, the letter N band propagation and reception. So basically they're doing up to 500 gigahertz, which means they can do accelerated particle beams from their property that literally they can blow satellites out of the sky. They can do anything. And that's what they're broadcasting there, that they have a 7-acre secure site, but 200 other acres. That means they have a huge underground facility. That's what they're telling you. They're also advertise. They do everything. There's nothing they don't do.
Klaus Schwab is somebody who wants to stay hidden in the shadowy corners of society, and who will only allow the average person to see a well-presented construct of their chosen persona. Is the real Klaus Schwab a kindly old uncle figure, wishing to do good for humanity? Or is he really the son of a Nazi collaborator, who used slave labour, and helped the Nazi efforts to obtain the first atomic bomb? Is Klaus Schwab the honest business manager whom we should trust to create a fairer society and workplace for the common man? Or is he the person who helped push Sulzer Escher-Wyss into a technological revolution that led to its role in the illegal creation of nuclear weapons for South Africa's racist...
Nothing. If you want, literally, they insinuate that they can do everything from spying on phones to satellites to experimental projects to things like DARPA, their DERA, all these things. And what they're saying is they're completely immune and they're outside of the broadcast zone. So when they set up the broadcast zones in Britain, they made sure no one could spy on this facility. That's what that means. And it also means that when they are spying, that nothing gets in their way. So to brag about that and then to sell it to a German company shows that, hello, if they just sold Cobalt Hill to a German company, now Germany is part of Five Eyes.
Apartheid regime. The evidence I have looked at does not suggest a kindly man, but rather a member of a wealthy, well-connected family that has a history of helping create weapons of mass destruction for aggressive racist governments. As Klaus Schwab said in 2006, "Knowledge will soon be available everywhere. I call it the Googleization of globalization. It's not what you know anymore, it's how you use it. You have to be a pace setter." Klaus Schwab considers himself to be a pace setter and a top-table player. And it must be said that his qualifications and experience are impressive. Yet, when it comes to practicing what you preach, Klaus Schwab has been found out.
And I don't trust Angela Merkel at all because of all the lies that I've heard her say. And I don't trust a country that has been told you can't have a standing army that now has one, along with France. We're in an age of insanity, but the war between Britain and Germany was not only a germ warfare in World War I and II, as you pointed out, but it continues to this very day. Now, I just want to close this by saying, you blew my mind. My skull exploded, my brain fell all over the room, and I'm trying to put them back in my skull. So we're going to have to talk about this again.
One of the three biggest challenges on the priority list for the World Economic Forum is the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Yet neither Klaus Schwab nor his father Eugen lived up to those same principles when they were in business. Quite the opposite. In January, Klaus Schwab announced that 2021 is the year that the World Economic Forum and its allies must rebuild trust with the masses. However, if Schwab continues to hide his history and that of his father's connections to the National Socialist model company that was Escher Wyss during the 1930s and 1940s, then people will have good reason to distrust the underlying motivations of his overreaching, undemocratic Great Reset agenda.
That's an ugly scene.
Yeah, I know, it's a really ugly sight, and it creates a mess. So I have to get you to promise to come back to talk about kinetic again, because when we get back a ways and we can get some perspective on this, I think we're going to see even more. Now, if you go any deeper and your researchers go any deeper than what you have revealed so far with this, I don't know. I'm breathless with this one. I don't know what I'll do the next time. So make sure I'm sitting down if you're going to tell me any further revelations that are as shocking as the ones that you've brought for us today, Michael.
In the case of the Schwabs, the evidence doesn't point at simply poor business practices or some sort of misunderstanding. The story of the Schwab family instead reveals a habit of working with genocidal dictators.
Well, let me close on the CTEL Cobbett Hill ownership. This CTEL company, which is German, was quickly flipped into another company that was funded by a British financing organization, which has two directors. One is currently controlling a company called Access, which is the merged companies, and he's on the board with Sir Roy A. Gardner.
For the base motives of profit and power. The Nazis and the South African apartheid regime are two of the worst examples of leadership in modern politics, yet the Schwabs obviously couldn't or wouldn't see that at the time. In the case of Klaus Schwab himself, it appears that he has helped to launder relics of the Nazi era, i.e. its nuclear ambitions and its population control ambitions, so as to ensure the continuity of a deeper agenda. While serving in a leadership capacity at Sulzer Escher Wyss, the company sought to aid the nuclear ambitions of the South African regime.
And Sir Roy A. Gardner is the chairman of Serco. So here we see this game that these guys try to play with the shell game of corporations to try to hide that they never really got away from the Queen.
At the time, the most Nazi-adjacent government in the world, preserving Escher Wyss's own Nazi-era legacy. Then, through the World Economic Forum, Schwab has helped to rehabilitate eugenics-influenced population control policies during the post-World War II era, a time when the revelations of Nazi atrocities quickly brought the pseudoscience into great disrepute. Is there any reason to believe that Klaus Schwab, as he exists today, has changed in any way? Or is he still the public face of a decades-long effort to ensure the survival of a very old agenda? The last question that should be asked about the real motivations behind the actions of Herr Schwab may be the most important for the future of humanity. Is Klaus Schwab trying to create the Fourth Industrial Revolution? Or is he trying to create the Fourth Reich?
Even though what they've done here is, because of all these flips, there's no reporting requirement, there's no transparency requirement to the British people of what these guys are doing by the way they've played this game.
Well, that's just proof that when it comes to the researchers and when it comes to Aim for Truth, when it comes to Betsy's team, and when it comes to the Americans for Innovation, and when it comes to Leader Technologies and the researchers, that these people, and this is proof, they can run, but they cannot hide.